Let's start. So we can open the meeting.
Okay, it's open now and the attendees are starting to come.
Someone will give me the floor, right, David?
Yes. Maybe, yes. I'll, in a moment. Welcome, everybody. We'll be starting in maybe 60 seconds. Let's just wait until we get a critical mass. Good morning, everybody, or evening or afternoon, depending on your locations. And I think we can start. So welcome to this second preparatory conference for the third Malaga Coalition. That sounds quite a complex title, but it'll become clear as we move forwards. Thank you so much for joining. The first preparatory conference was a meeting of mayors to look at the problematic of local government finance and the financial ecosystem that we need that works for cities and local governments. This second preparatory conference will look at some of the pieces of the jigsaw that are already coming together in terms of the financial ecosystem that works for cities and local governments. And just a reminder, as many of you will know, the Malaga Coalition was established around about 3 years ago now with United Cities and Local Governments and Fond Mondial de Ville, FMDV, together with UNCDF, the organization that I represent. And the objective of this coalition was to really bring together those who believe that local government finance is development finance, and we need to look again at the architecture of the financial system to make sure it works for cities and local governments if we're going to achieve the SDGs. Not everybody sees it that way, so this is a kind of coalition of people within institutions that have that view. The institution itself might not have that view, but the coalition members do. So let's operate on that basis. It's an open and frank discussion of what needs to be done to change the financial system so that it works for cities and local governments. So who better to provide some opening remarks than the Secretary General of United Cities and Local Governments, Amelia Sayers, a great friend. So thank you so much, Amelia, co-host, if you like, of the Malaga Coalition, and over to you.
Well, thank you very much, David, and greetings everybody from Seville, where we just finished our Executive Bureau of United Cities and Local Governments, and it is a great pleasure for me to address this meeting. As David was saying, the coalition is a coalition of the willing, a coalition of those that believe that we need to change the way we finance local government, because unless we do that, we will not be able to meet many of the global agendas of our shared objectives for the future. And one critical piece that has always united us, the different parts and the different members of this coalition, is to think that local finance is development finance, in fact. If you are financing local service provision, you are in fact financing the achievement and meeting the targets of the SDGs. Local service provision is at the heart of every transformation that we need to make. We need new services and universal services to actually ensure that we leave no one and no place behind. And we often start these kinds of meetings saying what doesn't work, but I think it is useful to also acknowledge what is starting to work. Although we are, of course, disappointed and to some extent also frustrated with the realization that the Addis Abeba visionary articles 34 has not been fully implemented, we are sensing a shift of narrative in many of the development agencies and in in the funding institutions about how they see local governments, their role, and the discussion around service provision. And I think we need to stick to that to actually trigger more transformation. We also see new mechanisms that are being put in place, and I am sure my colleagues, the executive director of UN Habitat, but also the executive director of UNCDF will talk more about that. So there are things that are changing. We have more mechanisms, and we also have more knowledge, and the work that we are developing with together with OECD in the observatory is a very good example of data that we are gathering that allows us to have a clear vision on what is needed. And of course, I also need to mention the International Municipal Investment Fund that is providing. It aims at providing technical assistance, but also at making sure that we create a pipeline that with projects and objectives that are financeable. And we are doing this with the same committed partners that are gathered here. So those are the good things that are happening. And as we were last April for the review of the new urban agenda in New York, Executive Director Maimouna Sharif will agree with me that we saw a very important shift in narrative from the national government, which is translating in many countries also in a shift of legislation and of the type of dialogues that our members, the constituency that I represent here, are having with the national governments. The truth is that it is not being enough, and it is also not enough the kind of investment that we are making to achieve the SDGs. So I guess that what this coalition needs to do is to trigger a scaling up. It is also to trigger the development of some of the mechanisms that we know are working. And to enhance the capacity of local and regional governments to produce their own resources. And these are legal frameworks that we need to change. We also want to foster a different type of financing and financial mobilization from the international community. I think that is what brings together the Malaga coalition, and I hope that this preparatory meeting will contribute to enhancing some of our objectives together, to bring more partners to the table, but also to identify concrete steps that we need to undertake together as we work towards next year's summit of the SDGs. I think this is becoming particularly relevant. And also, let's face it, the critical and complex context that we are having with the impact in our economies from the invasion in Ukraine, in our energy sector, in our production and consumption sectors, and make it more important than ever before to get our heads together about how to finance this sphere of government. So thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you to all the partners, to those that are part of our inner family, FMDB, but also in particular to the UN agencies, UNCDF and UN Habitat, for going into this path with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Amelia. Really grateful for those remarks. And yes, let's hope that we can get out of this, really revitalize those Addis discussions. We wanted financing for development to include financing for local developments. And let's make that happen this time round, I think. I'd now like to pass the floor to the Executive Director of UN Habitat, Maimouna Sharif. Thank you so much indeed for joining this meeting and agreeing to jointly open it. And of course, recently we have now agreed to co-manage the City Investment Facility, which is really in the spirit of the UN reform. It's a fused offering to cities so that rather than UN agencies falling over each other, creating a confused environment, there will be one way that they can engage with local investments through UN Habitat and UN CDF. So we hope that this will really drive not only our offering to cities, but also the UN reform process as mandated by the Secretary General. So over to you, Maimuna. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David, Excellencies, honorable guests, distinguished delegates, colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen. A very good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you, wherever you are. And I would like to thank UNCDF, thank you, Preeti, UCLG, Emilia, FMDV for organizing this very important event. I think everybody knows that 55% of the world population will live in cities. This has been discussed and been known all this while. And there are around 10,000 cities in the world. And between now and 2050, their population will have expanded by around 2.3 billion. So based on the current growth rate and trends of decreasing urban density, city footprints will roughly double in size to accommodate this growth. So this means that colleagues, building in 3 decades all the buildings and structure we built in the last 2,000 years. So the outlook is not particularly optimistic. So with an estimated 3 million people moving from rural areas to cities every day, there is increasing pressure on existing urban infrastructure. The result will be slums and informal settlements. So we need to take the following 3 steps in the urban to ensure that the urban growth is sustainable. One is that we need to find ways to ensure that cities and their hinterland to be better integrated. I've been trying to promote this integrated urbanization as whenever I have the opportunity to speak. And if we bridge the urban and rural divide with holistic and comprehensive urban planning, we achieve a more manageable pace of growth and distribute the benefit of urbanization more equitably. Number 2, I also would like to share that urban planning must promote adequate density, leading to more efficient development costs and also increase prosperity and reduce environmental and climate impact. There is a need to integrate sustainable urbanization and climate emergency, climate change. And third is we need adequate financing. That's what we are discussing now, to bridge the urban-rural gap, to harness the positive impact of urbanization. Urbanization always been seen as a negative impact, but if it is properly planned, properly managed, it can give positive impact to all. And we need to channel planned infrastructure investment to all cities. So I, as a former mayor, I saw Yvonne just join in. I can tell you that we can achieve this if we live by the, I used to say that CATE principle, CATEE, competence, accountable, transparent, efficient, and effective. These are the principles when I always use when I was a mayor. So cities can only achieve AAA status if we have accountable local governance. So without effective revenue system, cities are not viable partners for investment. What are the enabling environment to attract investment to the cities? So we also need more effective financing ecosystem that channel finance to all scales and geography of cities. So this includes those places that have been left behind for all this while. So colleagues, the World Urban Forums, our dialogue on special session on financing will bring together cities, development bank, and private sector to explore what this efficient and effective finance ecosystem should look like and define what is needed to make it happen. So both UN Habitat and UNCDF have recently joined forces to support local financing. Our FUSE offering includes analysis and advisory on local revenue and public financial management, and the city's investment facilities that undertakes financial preparation for the local SDG impact initiative and matches them with sources of finance. So we look forward to the outcomes of this discussion today, and let's agree to place small and intermediary cities, which often miss out on finance partnership, in the center of the debate, which we discussed very lengthy during every cities. I saw my colleague Yon very longs there. I was together with him in Kisumu talking about the intermediary cities. And I also would like to share with you, I'm very, very happy during the high-level meeting, during my participation at Davos World Economic Forum and Stockholm Plus 50, cities are at the forefront of the discussion. And financing cities and green investment and recovery are very much discussed. But we need action. Discussion, yes, we have dialogue, but we need action. So I would like to see that it's Malaga outcomes, and maybe at the World Urban Forum, we sit down together and come up with the action plan. So I look forward, colleagues, to welcoming all of you to the World Urban Forum. Will take place 26th to 30th of June in Katowice, Poland. Let us continue to work together, debate the issues, brainstorm, test solution, and what is important is do the action plan. I'm sure that we will succeed in enabling the cities to urbanize sustainably and create a better future for all as we promised in the new urban agenda since 2016. Thank you so much, David. I pass back the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Maimuna. Really inspiring remarks. And I think indeed, as you say, the policy agenda is starting to change, and people are starting to wake up to this. And the new urban agenda, starting to be seen as the glue that can bring together all of the sustainable development goals, because particularly across large parts of Africa and parts of Asia, urbanization is the reality. And I don't think that has really dawned on even African leaders necessarily, that unless they get their urbanization right, everything else will not fall into place. So really appreciate those remarks. And now I'd like to give the floor to our Executive Secretary from UNCDF, Priti Sinya, who has really transformed our organization into this hybrid UN agency and development finance institution, where we hope to be able to bridge this gap between the UN and development finance, and if you like, the whole spirit of the Malaga Coalition and the work we do with our partners, UCLG, UN Habitat and others, is in this spirit. So Priti, over to you.
Well, thank you, David, and good morning to all. Executive Director Maimuna, greetings, warm greetings. Emilia, Secretary General of UCLG, FMDV colleagues, honorable mayors, distinguished panelists, delighted to be here with colleagues and friends. So I'm pleased to welcome you in terms of UNCDF to this second preparatory meeting of the Malaga Global Coalition for Municipal Finance. Thank you so much for joining us. As you know, the Malaga Global Coalition for Municipal Finance is a unique alliance which was formed in 2018 as a response to the challenges faced by cities and local governments in accessing finance to advance sustainable and inclusive development in their territories. It calls for a new global financial ecosystem that works for cities and for local governments. Since 2018, the Malaga Coalition has been convened twice by UNCDF, UCLG, in collaboration with FMDV, and hosted by the city of Malaga. It has brought together a wide range of stakeholders and achieved significant results. The first Malaga conference identified the bottlenecks and challenges in the current financial ecosystem, preventing cities and local governments from achieving the SDGs, and agreed on the need for structural change in the architecture of local finance. The second Malaga conference launched a dedicated investment fund for local governments in developing countries, called the International Municipal Investment Fund. This fund, managed by Meridiam in Paris, is established as an instrument of the coalition to finance local transformative projects. I'm pleased to share with you today that UNCDF and Meridiam have entered into an agreement last month to frame our collaboration and define the project origination process for this fund. Now we head towards the third Malaga conference to address the structural challenges to local government finance and concrete solutions, particularly in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. Most importantly, we are now able to identify the building blocks of the required financial ecosystem. The good news is that besides or despite these challenges, some of these building blocks are being put into place as we speak. And of course, we will head towards the World Urban Forum where all of this can be explored more. Just yesterday, the Local Climate Adaptive Living Facility, LOCAL, was discussed at the UNFCCC meeting in Bonn. LOCAL, as you know, aims to become a non-market approach under Article 6.8 of the Paris Agreement that will enable local access to global climate finance through national systems. Secondly, the International Municipal Investment Fund, an instrument of this Malaga coalition, will soon be active and actively investing. Today, we will be discussing the importance of guarantees in local government finance. Tanzania, for example, has begun the process of building a domestic market for municipal bonds to recycle local savings and pension funds into transformative infrastructure. A number of instruments to talk about today. Last month, the African continent, on the African continent, the 9th Afri-City Summit called for the need to increase the local fiscal space, improving own source revenue and asset base as capital, bearing in mind that 40% of the GDP comes from intermediary cities. Highlighted the intergovernmental fiscal transfers as a key part of the local government finance. Development of domestic local capital markets, access to international capital markets to support subnational investment. In fact, the African cities and governments, UCLG and other partners are working together to create a fund for Africa. Clearly, there are challenges, but as a hybrid UN agency and a development finance institution here at UNCDF, it is our mandate to work with you to address these challenges. The recently approved UNCDF strategic framework outlines UNCDF's role as a UN hub for subnational finance, as my colleague David mentioned. This ambition was endorsed by the G77 group of countries in last week's executive board meeting in New York for UNCDF. We have recently concluded an agreement with UN Habitat, leadership of Maimuna, to co-manage the city's investment facility, which we hope will provide a joint offering from the UN to cities on subnational finance. Our latest publication, Local Government Finance is Development Finance, highlights the investment agenda for a healthy and livable planet. The Malaga Coalition is all about the policy agenda required to construct this new financial ecosystem. And therefore, based on everything that I have just outlined, I'm so delighted to be here today at this opening of this meeting. In conclusion, I would like to thank all the coalition partners for your continued support and collaboration in local government finance. And I wish all of us a fruitful discussion and looking forward to the meeting outcomes. Thank you so much. Back to you, David.
Thank you very much indeed, Priti, for those framing opening remarks. I think that has put us on a good track now for the rest of the meeting. So really appreciate that, and particularly your mention of our role as this hybrid entity as UNCDF, and hopefully being able to knit together the UN system and the development finance architecture. There's a publication that Amadou has mentioned in the chat box there, which also highlights the thinking behind this agenda of the Malaga Coalition. And now we're going to have a brief I'm just going to say a few words about the logic, why local government finance is development finance. And then we will move to a moderated discussion about the building blocks of this new financial ecosystem that we aim to build. So essentially, and this argument is outlined in the publication, which is mentioned there in the chat box. Development is about the pursuit of economic growth, with the purpose of promoting health, happiness, realization, and prosperity. That has been the tradition behind the thinking of development. And economists from across the political spectrum have identified a correlation between productivity and development, and economic policy is designed accordingly. Yet two disruptions have broken this analysis about productivity, development, and growth. The first is the climate and environmental crisis, which means that productivity alone is not sufficient, because there can be no future for any of us without a healthy and livable planet. The second disruption is rapidly accelerating urbanization, and also the need to retrofit existing cities to this first disruption, which is the climate crisis. So rapidly urbanizing countries are experiencing low productivity, environmentally unhealthy towns and cities due to chronic underinvestment in local infrastructure and services. And towns and cities in already urbanized countries struggle with the incremental cost of adapting to climate change and contributing to net zero emissions. So in addition to the productive transition, in addition to building productivity through economic growth, we actually need two other transitions. One is, of course, the green transition, and the whole world is now recognizing that it's not only about growth, it's also about planetary health. But the second one is the urban transition. And this was recognized in the new urban agenda, but probably wasn't really taken seriously enough at the time. It was also recognized in paragraph 34 of the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, the financing for development, but again, not taken seriously. And now what we see is these three coming together, because we will not be able to address the productive transition to greater productivity and better standards of living, or the green transition without doing the urban transition, and particularly in places that are rapidly urbanizing, but of course also in places that are already urbanized, because those cities need to be made environmentally sustainable. This is the challenge now, the urban transition, how to finance it. And the publication in the chat box provides examples of the transformation we need in our towns and cities. And these don't come from thin air. These have been developed during a series of podcasts that the Malaga Coalition participated in and organized. Many of the panelists and the speakers were interviewees in those podcasts, and also a series of meetings. The first two meetings of the Malaga Coalition have contributed to understanding the type of transformation we need in our towns and cities. But then, as you will see in the publication, we examine how the current policy on development finance is not making this happen. Yes, the resources are there, but the current arrangements are not able to deliver them at scale. Because the current arrangements don't recognize that local government finance is a form of development finance. And we need this financial ecosystem that works for cities and local governments if we are to survive and thrive on the planet. So what are these pieces of this financial ecosystem? And the publication there, which emerges from the previous Malaga conferences and the series of podcasts, as I mentioned, highlights 5 essential reforms to trigger the required capital flows. One is increased fiscal transfers to local governments as an effective instrument of national development, particularly for the deployment of climate finance. This has to be seen, and my colleague Jean-Pierre Mbassi is continually arguing this with African presidents. This has to be seen as an investment in the one economy. Fiscal transfers to local governments are an investment in your economy. It also has to be seen, and we'll be putting this case at the COP in Egypt coming up soon, as a way of effectively channeling climate finance for adaptation. And we'll be talking to partners following this meeting about how to make that case at COP and to get global instruments like the Local Climate Adaptive Living Facility, which is owned by currently 30 countries, uses the intergovernmental fiscal transfer mechanism for climate adaptation finance. That has to become part of the financial architecture. So all cities have direct access to global climate finance for adaptation. Adaptation is something which actually they have the comparative advantage to do. It falls within their mandate. It's land use planning, it's road management, it's water management, it's building standards, adaptation is a local government activity. The second, so in addition to intergovernmental fiscal transfers as an instrument of development, the second reform needs to be enhanced scope for local government taxation, fees, and asset management to boost local fiscal space. And sadly, following the COVID crisis, local fiscal space has significantly dropped. And indeed, many of the responses to COVID have further damaged local fiscal space. The move to online transactions damages local shops and marketplaces, and they pay local taxes, whereas the online providers don't. And again, the examples of this are highlighted in the publication. Local fiscal space is essential for local capital market development, and I'll come to that in a moment. It's also essential for the bond of trust between the citizen and the state, so that the local entity can provide local services to local citizens. And without local fiscal space, it's difficult to provide the platform for private sector and local economic development growth in the city. So there has to be enhanced scope for local taxation and clever use of technology to enable this to happen. So you can have micro taxes rather than big chunky taxes that don't feel as painful to pay, but can actually generate significant revenues. And there's various ways in which this can be done. The third, of course, asset management as well is one of those, is one way to build local fiscal space. And together with UNDESA, we recently launched a publication on local asset management and a global training course. And local governments need to better use their assets as vehicles to build their local fiscal space. And there's a lot of cases in which that's not properly happening. We'll be hearing more examples about that in the conversation. The third reform required is expanded domestic capital markets for long-term debt finance and the recycling of domestic savings through local government bonds. So this is very, very important. In many rather wealthier countries, this is the way that local infrastructure has been financed. The London Underground was financed through a long bond. And one of the authors of the recent UN Habitat, European Union study on financing sustainable urban development that UNCDF contributed to and was a member of the advisory board to, points out that this is Professor Sir Paul Collier, that his institution, Oxford University, has just issued a 100-year bond at a rate of 2% above the base rate. And that's built on the strength of that institution. And that's the way that that infrastructure is financed in places that can afford to finance it like that. We need to start to get the recycling of domestic capital through local infrastructure bonds in developing countries too, so that pension funds and local savings can be recycled, and that there's no need to look at exchange rate risks and other problems that are associated with international capital. So we've begun this work in a number of countries, and we'll come to this again during the discussion. Now, the fourth element is patient city-friendly equity finance to provide stable and city-friendly partnerships. And we've created the International Municipal Investment Fund as a result of this coalition. There may need to be more such institutions. Equity finance is a great complement to debt finance and to domestic bonds on domestic capital markets, because it enables cities to really look at how they can put into place these fundamental elements, public transport systems, public housing, basic utilities, with a long-term stable form of financing that does not increase the debt burden either locally or nationally. So you need a bit of a combination of local domestic bonds that do not increase necessarily national debt, plus equity finance that also does not do that if it's done properly. And we're very happy that we'll be talking to the International Municipal Investment Fund again during this meeting. So city-friendly equity funds, equity finance to provide stable and city-friendly partnerships, the fourth element. And the fifth, a global guarantee fund for cities that can really make all of this happen. Because still, as we mentioned in the introduction, the way that local government finance is viewed in the international regulations of the Bretton Woods institutions is it's often seen as a contingent liability on the sovereign. And there needs to be ways to guarantee that, to remove that obstacle whilst reforms are taking place. And also, in any case, in order to get these things moving, in order to get domestic bond markets moving, in order to support city-friendly equity funds, in order to support the financing through domestic banks of special purpose vehicles, there needs to be a guarantee. And we're working with a number of institutions, including the European Union and Swedish CEDA. In fact, there was a meeting yesterday with them on this particular topic about global guarantee funds for cities that can actually help to drive this agenda forwards. So to summarize the 5 essential reforms that we'll be discussing today: increased fiscal transfers to local governments as an effective instrument of national development, particularly for the deployment of climate finance; enhanced scope for local government taxation, fees, asset management to boost local fiscal space, number 2. Number 3, expanded domestic capital markets for long-term debt finance and the recycling of domestic savings through local government bonds. Number 4, patient city-friendly equity finance to provide stable and city-friendly partnerships. And number 5, global guarantee funds for cities to defray sovereign liability on subnational finance, and also to drive this pipeline going forwards. Now, this may sound impossible, and it's not for nothing that Emilia said this is a coalition of the willing. There have been many other meetings at which these things have been proposed, and then, of course, people have come and said, no, you can't do it, it's not going to work. What about the IMF? Low capacity, local governments are corrupt, etc., etc., etc. That's why this is a coalition of the willing. The Malaga coalition is people who believe that this can be done, and also needs to be done, if we are going to survive on the planet and if we're going to build a healthy future for future generations. Just look at a place like Bangladesh. I think it's the 4th biggest country in the world in terms of population. It's going to be the 3rd. It's overtaking others. There are already numerous cities in Bangladesh with over 1 million, 2 million, 3 million inhabitants. There's still not proper public transport systems, even in the biggest of those. The water provision infrastructure is based on a population 10th the size of the current size of those cities. There is no way that Bangladesh can borrow from the Asian Development Bank, China, and the World Bank to be able to deliver all of this infrastructure. The current system will not work, despite the best efforts of those managing the current system. There needs to be a new ecosystem that works for Bangladeshi cities. And we're putting together the pieces of that. So it may sound impossible, but we have to try, because without it, there won't be a future. And the alternative is unthinkable. The proposed reforms to this Malaga agenda free up both global and national capital for the required investment, because the money is there. It's about creating the mechanisms for it to flow, both publicly and privately. And you'll see this in the publication that's mentioned in the chat box. So now we're going to move to the discussion. And what I'll try and do is just to lead us through the various entities that are bringing forwards the pieces of this financial ecosystem that we actually need. And as Emilia mentioned at the beginning, we didn't have all of these together at the time of the first Malaga coalition. So partly through our own efforts, but also partly through efforts of others, and just partly through luck, I guess, these pieces are starting to come together. And we are starting to understand the importance of this agenda, but probably partly through the imperative of it, because I think it's becoming patently clear that without local government finance, there will be no global development. And we're seeing this increasingly at AfriCities, at other forums, and it's becoming increasingly acknowledged, I think, within the UN, and we hope to be able to channel this acknowledgement into building this financial ecosystem, and to piloting and testing ways of making it happen through all the initiatives that we'll be talking about soon. So I think you've all seen the agenda. You've all seen the elements of these building blocks. And we're going now to lead through to kind of move through them one by one, not necessarily in the order that is listed there. And I think I'd like to start off by talking about the data for subnational finance. So Isabel Chatri, who is the head of decentralization, subnational finance and the infrastructure unit at the OECD Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions and Cities, has been working very closely with United Cities and Local Governments, UNCDF, FMDV and others on something called the Global Observatory for Subnational Finance. And without the data, without the knowledge of what is actually happening in this area, it's actually very difficult to move forwards. And particularly on the intergovernmental fiscal transfer angle, which is covered extensively in this publication. So Isabel, I'd like to give you the floor first. And maybe if you could, talk very briefly about the Global Observatory on Subnational Finance, but also connect the data that you're collecting from all the countries to this agenda that I was outlining, because without the data, it'll be difficult to convince people. Over to you, Isabel.
Thank you very much, David, for this introduction. I have some slides. I don't know if it is possible to show them.
Yes, please. We can see them. Over to you.
And I need also to. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. So let's start. So yes. So thank you very much for this opportunity to discuss oh, sorry, I have problem with my screen. Okay, so can you hear me now? Okay, so thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this important event, and also, as you said, to highlight the importance of having valid, reliable, comparable subnational finance data. So having data is crucial. It's not only a technical topic for statisticians. It is really a strategic and political topic. And the importance of having territorial and fiscal data should be given greater acknowledgement by national government as well as by the international community. So it's great that you put this topics among the building blocks of a global financial ecosystems that works for some national government. Availability and quality statistics particularly matter in all decentralization policies. They are crucial for improving diagnosis, but also for designing, implementing, and evaluating policies. They are also essential for partners, in particular public development and private banks and capital markets committed to finance some national government projects. So this data should be objective, they should be neutral. It is a question of accountability. You insisted in the introduction of the importance of accountability, of transparency, and improving trust in government. And we know it is a big challenge because there is a lack of data in many countries, and especially in developing and least developed countries. And this is why we created with UCLG and the support of different partners, including UNCDF, the Agence Française de Développement, ADB, CEB, GIZ, a unique worldwide database on some national government finance and multi-level governance system. It is the World Observatory on some national government finance and investment, or WOFI. So next slide, please. For those who are not familiar with this initiative, I would like to highlight the 4 main objectives of the World Observatory. The first is to bridge the fiscal data gap and provide access to standardized, comparable and reliable data on multi-level governance and finance. The second is to support policy making at all levels and to provide government with a reliable source of information for evidence-based policy making. The third is to serve as a capacity building tool at the international, national, and subnational level. And finally, it can support international dialogue and facilitate exchange of experience, peer-to-peer learning, and constructive discussion between international, national, and local stakeholders and their financial partners, as it is the case today. So we have already released 2 previous editions a pilot study in 2016, and the second edition in 2019, which was presented during the first international conference of the World Observatory in Paris in June. And now we are about to launch the third edition on 24 October in Paris at the OECD headquarters. So let me describe quickly, but in more detail, the observatory different outputs and future outputs. The first main output are reports. And so next slide, please. So in particular, country profiles and synthesis report. There were 100 countries covered in the previous edition, which will be extended to other 130 countries with the third edition, with new countries in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, Middle East, West Asia, for example. In total, these represent more than 80% of the global surface area and 85% of the global population. The country profiles provide quantitative, but also qualitative information on multi-level governance framework, territorial organization, the allocation of responsibilities, expenditure, revenue source, fiscal rules, etc. There will be in a new section on the consequence of COVID-19 pandemic on some national government finance. So it will be a new section of the third edition. The synthesis report provides a snapshot of multi-level governance reform, a synthesis on how some national governments are organized around the world, their main responsibilities. And the upcoming report will comprise, in addition, sections on particular topics such as the property tax around the world, public-private partnerships, infrastructure investment, and also some focus on least developed countries. The second output, next slide, is the database. It compiles a unique set of indicators on the subnational government organization, on subnational finance with indicators on expenditure, on investment, on revenues, grants, taxes, user charges, etc., and finally on debt. The database will cover the year 2019-2020 for most countries in the next edition, and we wanted to include, in fact, data on the impact of the crisis, at least for 2020. All this information is available online on the dedicated website. You can see the link on the slide, sng-wofi.org. And in addition to the database, the platform comprises an interactive visualization tool that enables country comparison on the map or through different charts. So next slide, and I will end that now. But before finishing, I saw that you mentioned the importance of having data on climate change in the agenda. So we are also making progress in this area. And we will present, in fact, next week on Wednesday, June 22, during a conference, the outcomes of a 2-year project we have had with the European Commission on measuring and enhancing subnational climate finance. So no, thank you again for this opportunity to present this work. And we hope to see you on 24 October 2022 at the OECD for the launch conference of the World Observatory. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Isabel. And I think they're very comprehensive, but just to connect what you were saying to the discussion earlier, you know, this data is going to be important if we are to build this financial ecosystem. So we have already identified and it's already pretty much acknowledged climate adaptation is local, all adaptation is local, and that cities and local governments have the comparative advantage to deliver climate finance. They are more effective in delivering climate finance than big projects managed at the national level. There is now mechanisms, including the local climate adaptive living facility owned by 30 countries, to deliver climate finance locally. And the idea is at COP, that then becomes a non-market approach under Article 6.8, how to connect that to your work so that the data of global climate finance delivered locally to adapt locally reports globally can then be captured in your reports. I think these are the dots we want to connect through this meeting. And so I'm going to stick on the topic of intergovernmental fiscal transfers and the OECD observatory with UCLG really effectively captures the comparison between different countries and their intergovernmental transfer systems. And I'm going to now give the floor to Mr. Saidu Halidou, who is the Secretary General of the Ministry of Interior and Decentralization in Niger. He will be speaking in French, and we'll be talking a little bit about the way in which in Niger, they are deploying climate finance through intergovernmental fiscal transfers as part of this first element of the building blocks that for this new global financial ecosystem. And then we'll move, I think, to another one of the building blocks that were identified. So please, if you would like to understand the French and you need interpretation, there should be a little interpretation box down below on your Zoom. Please click that and click the correct channel. And the floor is yours. Saidu Halidou, Secretary General, Ministry of Interior and Decentralization from Niger. And thank you very much indeed for joining this meeting. Over to you.
Monsieur Oumarou, vous avez la parole.
Please start to speak.
Monsieur Oumarou Moussa, vous avez la parole. Je ne sais pas si vous nous entendez.
Okay, so there may be a problem there with the connection. So I think we will come back to that topic later in the meeting. With regard to the intergovernmental fiscal transfer element of the coalition that we seek to build. And so I'd now like to move on to the own source revenue, which was the second of those building blocks that we talked about. Now, it's often, said that local governments are very inefficient at collecting their own source revenue. And some studies done have shown that, in fact, even Kisumu in Kenya, where they recently hosted the Afri-Cities conference, there was one study showing that only 15% of the potential revenue is actually collected. So if you imagine with the remainder of the 85%, what that would do to local fiscal space. But there are a lot of success stories, and a solid local tax base is essential for the other pieces of the jigsaw that we're going to come to later. So I'd like to give the floor to Honorable Regina Bakit Nakazi Musoki, who is the mayor of Nansana Municipal Council in Uganda, to talk about the improved own source revenue. And from that, we will generalize a little in the sense that there is now a growing body of local governments that are making major strides in own source revenue. But it does require, of course, support from central government in providing the enabling environment for this to happen. Over to you, Honorable Nakasi Musoki.
Okay, thank you so much. And I'm happy that I've been, this is my first time to be part of this coalition meeting under the financial ecosystems. Nansana Municipality is a municipality found in Uganda, and it is its proximity to Kampala has enabled us to get opportunities, especially in terms of improving our local revenue. First of all, our mandate is from the Local Government Act and also the Public Finance Management Act 215, which allows us to levy, to collect, to administer, and also account for the revenue. Currently, Nansana Municipality championed as a municipality under Wachiso districts under the new automation system that was initiated in Kampala Capital City Authority with support from UNCDF and also FMDV and also World Bank. And this system has really enabled us to increase on our local arrest revenue, because before we became part of this system, we are using a manual system. And as you know, there was challenges of manual system, like issues of linkages in revenue and collection of revenue. There are also ghost taxpayers. Also, there was an issue of underassessment, and we didn't have a system, a timely reporting system. So when we came on board of this IRA system, first of all, we are able to increase on our database from 12,000 taxpayers to now, we have over now 79,000 taxpayers in the municipality. And we have had a good trend in the collection of local arrest revenue. Among the revenue sources, we have what we call a property rate, which is basically for capital development. This has, when I came in 20, before the ILA system, we are only collecting over 978 million, but now we have gone to 2.5 billion. Then also business licenses, they have also increased to something like 2.5 billion Uganda shillings. Then also the plan fees have really also increased. So currently, if I can show the trend in 2018, 2019, we were to 2.5 billion. Then 2018, 2019, we went up to 2.8. Then 2020, 2021, we went to 3.7. As I talk now, we are in 5.154 billion, which is an equivalence of $1,374,000 US. However, when you look at that trend, we have been able to make some savings out of that local arrest revenue, because as I talk now, government fiscal transfers are really, they don't target a lot more capital developments, and most of the money that comes from the central government, they caters for operational costs like salaries, like non-wage, among others. So this local arrest revenue, as council, we have an autonomy to be able to allocate to the different areas where we need service delivery. And we have been able in these 7 years, we have been able to purchase a grader worth $1 billion Uganda shillings, which is now really doing a lot of work in the community, because government was unable to provide a load unit for us. And we have also in this financial year budget for more money to ensure that we are able to purchase the road equipments. We went ahead also to purchase a garbage truck, because as you know, with the increasing urbanization, Nansana is proximity to Kampala. We had a lot of garbage, and in order to build a municipality of choice, we had to purchase a garbage truck, which is really doing a lot of work for us. Also, the money that we saved from local arrest revenue, we are able also to purchase a garbage land, which we are going to transform into a treatment center for the Greater Kampala, because currently we are under Greater Kampala strategy, and we have brought our efforts together to see how we can work together. So that is over 20 acres. And I believe when we get more money, and also when we bring other joint partners on board, like GIZ, I think we are going to do a lot in terms of waste management. We have also gone ahead, because currently my municipality is really not enough for us. We have gone ahead to construct an annex out of that property money. And we have been able to house most of our staff in that annex, and it's almost on completion. So we have also this automation, as we brought Nansana to be probably a role model in Uganda among the municipalities, being that I'm the chairperson of all the urban mayors in Uganda. Many urban councils are coming to benchmark with Nansana. And I believe that within some years to come, all other local governments are going to increase, because currently we have 31 municipalities in Uganda. We have 13 cities and also more than 600 town councils. So what we are doing is to ensure that we recommend them to start the automation system. However, along the way, I've seen some gaps within this ILAS where we shall need improvement. As much as we have done a lot in improving, in enhancing our local arrest revenue, but still it is more of money, because when we look at our data system, it was developed manually. And you remember, when you have a manual system, someone can easily tamper with it. Even other taxes like property tax, I think we need also to automate the system, ensure that it's part of the GIS when we do our evaluation list in the future, because currently when you find that we can't able get the money from the industries and other bigger institutions because of course still some corruption within the technical people. So I believe when those gaps are bridged, because as I talk now, when you compare the money we have for the last 6 years since when ILAS came in, it would have been something like I think 22 billion Uganda shillings, but that is an equivalent of almost 5,100 million US dollars. But when you look at what we have today, it's just 4,000 million US dollars, and we have a deficit of almost 1 million US dollar, which has been lost through those leakages. So currently, I believe as when hands with the increased service delivery, because Nansana is growing very fast and urbanizing very fast, and our proximity to Kampala with the donors, I believe UNCDF can come on board and help us. Then FMD can also do the same. And also what you want to do, you want to go into getting loans. And you are aware that you can't get a loan unless you can raise 25% of your current revenue. We want to invest in money more in markets. So I believe when we get a fund where we can be able to allocate some money by executive and approval by council, we were more than willing to ensure that we become members. Like when I was in Afri cities, there was a proposal of UCLOG to open for us a fund. I think they said we can pay over, I think $1,000 is not much to Nansana municipality. So when we have a basket and we are able to put in money, I believe we shall be in a position to borrow that money and we shall be able to meet the repayment period. So I would like some of the enabling factor that we've been having is the political leadership, like the mayor have been supporting a lot, because I championed the ILAS in the greater Kampala. I was the first municipality. Now I have 99% of the technical staff who are able to go and collect tax, and also we have champions among them. We also have external.
Thank you, Honourable Mayor. Thank you so much indeed. This is a great contribution. And just to keep the discussion moving, I'm going to ask you two very quick questions. What is your ceiling? How much better how much more revenue could you raise? So what is your ambition? And secondly, are there any legal reforms or any obstacles to you raising more revenue? And we're going to move, you talked about borrowing and you talked about initiatives like the African Territorial Agency, and we're going to come on to those very shortly. So just to kind of segue into that, if you could just outline, are you halfway there? 25% of the way there, or do you think you're at your maximum now? How much more can you raise, get in the pot? Just very quickly. And then secondly, do you feel the legal environment could be healthier, could help you more? Are there any kind of reforms you would like to see? But very quickly, and then we're going to move to on, and we may come back to you, because the records you have described is truly impressive. But you're not alone. I mean, you're representing a number of cities that are actually making it happen, and you're proving wrong those who believe it can't be done. Over to you.
Okay. Yeah, I believe our ceiling now, Nansana has a capacity of raising $5 million and $5 million as per that. I think 20 billion. We can always get. I think we can be able to raise 20 billion in a year if we are able to minimize those linkages. And the support I want is we want us to this ILAS system, the integrated system. How can we improve it more? By making it more automated. Can you try to see the gaps that are in this existing ILAS so that we can improve it to get more money? In building so capacity of my staff, linkages, yes.
No, that is a great answer.
Yes, that's
great answer. $5 million equivalent. That is exactly the answer that I was looking for. So the type of system that we're putting together and the type of projects that can be financed, and including domestic bonds, those who say it can't be done, it can be done. If your city can have own source revenue of $5 million a year, for example, that is a significant body of money. And together with other forms of finance, you can responsibly deploy that in lots of very interesting ways. So thank you so much. And I think we're going to come back to you towards the end of the discussion. So really appreciate your comments. And so now I think we've seen the potential for own source revenue mobilization. Maybe just one more question back to you. What's the population of your city?
The population organized by the
population.
Yeah, by the 2014 census, we are 368, but now as per now, we are 568 people. Population number of people. 568,000. Yes. Yeah.
Even better. Thank you. Thank you
even
so much.
More than that. Yeah.
No. Even better for the point I'm trying to make. Because with a city of only 568,000, which is small. Yes. Currently in African terms, you have a target of $5 million revenue through your own source revenues alone, not during fiscal transfers, not others, just through your own source revenues. So thank you so much indeed, Honorable Mayor. Note that down, everybody. 500,000 people can give you $5 million a year. Now that we'll use the rest of the conversation to see how we can leverage that 5 million a year to bring much more, because of course even that is only a small proportion of your total revenue, because as all countries, you receive other revenue sources, including that from central government, including that from climate finance. The local climate adaptive living facility can increase that. So now I'm going to pass the floor over, I think, to Mr. Alawi Ahmed, the Project Resource Mobilization Coordinator of the Tanga Urban Water Supply and Sanitation Authority in Tanzania. And in Tanzania, you're looking at launching what we call the Tanga Water Bond. This will be launched on the Dar es Salaam Stock Exchange. I'd like you to say a couple of words about this bond, the ticket size, and how the revenue, how the bond will be serviced, how the debt will be serviced, and who you expect to purchase the bond. So the investors in the bond and the revenue streams that will service this bond. Over to you, Mr. Alawi Ahmed. Are you ready, Tanzania? Or perhaps Mr. Bai Sambelo, the financing and PPPs expert of the Ministry of Economy, Planning and International Cooperation in Senegal. Are you available?
Je suis bien là.
Okay, so we seem to have lost Tanzania. So maybe Amadou and Nan, if you could try to get them back. And whilst we are waiting, we're going to hand the floor to Senegal, who are also exploring a local.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Jackson.
Over to you.
Je voudrais, dans le cadre du sujet qui nous regroupe aujourd'hui, insister sur le fait que les institutions de microfinance et les banques de développement sont appelées à jouer un rôle très important. Nous avons dans notre environnement local, en dehors de la BOAD, la Banque Ouest Africaine de Développement, nous avons une banque nationale de développement économique au Sénégal. Nous avons également la Caisse nationale de crédit. Et donc, ces structures-là sont appelées à intervenir. Donc, j'achèterai en fait le Crédit Mutuel du Sénégal, qui est aussi une structure de microfinance qui joue un rôle important. Mais à ces niveaux-là, le défi est de régler les problèmes de coût et de durée des financements. Du fait que la maturation longue doit permettre de rendre les investissements plus opérants pour la réalisation des projets locaux. Souvent donc, le coût du financement et la durée de maturation constituent des obstacles. Et pour arriver à réussir ce recyclage des capitaux, évoqué tantôt également par un intervenant précédent, au Sénégal, le ministère de l'Économie, du Plan et de la Coopération a identifié parmi les instruments innovants la mise en place d'un fonds commun de placement à risque, FCPR, dans le but d'offrir aux épargnants, aussi bien institutionnels que particuliers, la possibilité d'investir dans des sociétés privées et dans des projets stratégiques de l'État et des collectivités territoriales, donc principalement des projets de partenariat public-privé. Des secteurs prioritaires sont ciblés comme le transport, l'énergie, l'industrie pharmaceutique, l'eau, la santé, l'éducation et l'assainissement. Et nous comptons veiller à ce que l'horizon de placement dans ce fonds soit de 8 ans minimum et avec un rendement minimum de 10%. Donc, pour régler aussi bien la question de la durée que la question donc du coût du financement. La structuration, l'organisation et la finalisation de ce fonds vont être confiées à CGF Bourse, CGF Gestion et Impact 6 Securities. Et d'autres parties prenantes dans le cadre de la mise en place de ce fonds sont le fonds 6 et la caisse de dépôt et consignation qui seront des co-promoteurs. J'ajouterai aussi que avec la nouvelle loi PPP, donc portant sur les contrats de partenariat public-privé, la capacité de financement et de mise en œuvre de la préparation et du suivi des projets va être renforcée avec la mise en place d'un fonds d'appui à la préparation des projets de partenariat public-privé, mais également la mise en place d'un organe expert logé au niveau du ministère de l'Économie, dénommé Unité nationale d'appui au partenariat public-privé. Merci donc, c'est cette contribution que je voulais apporter.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Good to hear about the combination of the legislative support in Senegal for PPPs and the work that you're able to do in your municipality to bring that forwards. And of course, as we've been discussing earlier, these PPPs need ways of financing them. This can be through concessions, which may involve equity. It can also be through debt, which may involve domestic bonds. And fortunately, we can come back now to Tanga, and I'm going to call on Peter Malika, who can substitute for Alawi Ahmed.
Hello, David. Thank you. I just wanted to check one more time if Mr. Alawi from Tangawasa is online. If not, I will proceed. Okay. Over to you if Mr. Alawi is on board. He was switching equipment.
Okay, let's wait and see. I think given the time, Peter, we'll go to you, but I'd like to just to make the connection to continue to make the connections between the speakers. So we heard from Uganda about the potential in terms of local fiscal space. We heard $5 million a year for a population of 500,000 people. We've just heard from Senegal about the PPP legislation and the way in which that is actually very favorable now. And the FONCIS that was referred to by our colleague from Senegal is a sovereign wealth fund, which can invest in these PPPs at the local level and recycling the capital from the microfinance, as he mentioned. And so these are two really good building blocks towards having a domestic bond market for local infrastructure finance. And that's what we're working on in Tanzania. So it's just to draw to make the connections between the speakers. And with that in mind, if you could talk briefly on the Tanga bond, the Tanga water bond. Over to you, Peter.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, David. So the Tanga bond, it's a water infrastructure green revenue bond. So basically, the Tanga Wasa, this is a subnational autonomous water authority operating in the Tanga region and supplying water to the rural areas of the Tanga region and also city of Tanga. Now, the use of the proceeds, so the transaction itself is a $23 million equivalent. It will be issued in local currency in the Dar es Salaam Stock Exchange in Tanzania by end of the year. It is a bankable project. And so this transaction is basically for the new infrastructure, but also to extend water supply systems and also to rehabilitate the dilapidated infrastructure that is existing. So it's for new infrastructure and also for repairing existing infrastructure and also adding prepaid meters and other things. One of the areas is also conservation of the water sources. So this is a climate resilience element. And because of that, this bond will qualify as a green bond. Green bond by assessment and certification to meet global standards. But also it has a lot of climate resilience in terms of its infrastructure and intended use of the proceeds. So I wanted to say some of the important information includes currently the water losses, the revenue losses from the water is about 23%. So this translates into loss of revenue for up to 23% because of the old infrastructure. One of the things that is also important and also more of innovation in terms of governance structures, we will establish, will support, basically the Tanga Wasa will establish a special purpose vehicle, an SPV, an investment company, which will be managed both by Tanga Wasa, but also with participants from the investors coming from the Dar es Salaam Stock Exchange. This way, there is a way to ring fence revenue for the specific investment in order to be able to repay the interest rate and also to repay the principal at the end of the tenure. Now, so this is our experience in Tanzania and also working with Tanga Wasa. You know, one of the most important things and a very big credit to Tanga Wasa is because they actually have a bankable project. Our work was to review and look at the due diligence work on our part to confirm that it is a bankable project. In addition to that, I think Tanga Wasa also has received approvals from their board and also has received preliminary approvals from the Ministry of Water, but also preliminary discussion with Ministry of Water, so the Ministry of Finance. So what we found out that, You know, it is not this work together with Tangawasa, you cannot do it alone. So you need partners like development partners like UNCDF. You need a buy-in from on the political process. So you need both technical buy-in, but also you need political buy-in. So with this transaction, we, at the end of the day, we hope that the transaction will be listed and the use of proceeds will go to Tangawasa. And also there will be a monitoring and evaluation component of it. And also there will be a post-issue.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you so much indeed, Peter. Can you hear me? Peter, we can't hear you anymore, but can you hear me? Thank you so much indeed for those comments. And I think that's very, very useful to show what can be done. The revenue streams can be there. As you pointed out, the bankability can even be there. And $23 million, a revenue bond on a domestic stock exchange for local infrastructure is something which would not have been, many people would have said it was not possible. And now I'm going to give the floor to Jean-Pierre Ilong Mbasi, who is the Secretary General of United Cities and Local Governments Africa. And Jean-Pierre has been proposing something called the African Territorial Agency, which was referred to by the Honorable Mayor from Uganda. And it would be an investment instrument that would be able to invest in these kind of interventions. I'm coming to you, Jean-Pierre, because I'm aware that you actually have to leave for the airport very shortly. I understand we may have Mr. Alawi online already, and we'll come back to you, Mr. Alawi. Thank you. And I understand you also had an issue connecting, but we need to go to Jean-Pierre first. He's about to board a plane. Now, Jean-Pierre, what is so exciting about the African Territorial Agency is it would be a fully mutual investment fund that would be capitalized by African cities to invest in these kind of transactions. And the point of this meeting is to show there is actually a market for it, to show that it does actually have legs to stand on. So would you like to comment based on what you've heard so far, Jean-Pierre? And then I think we were going to come to Tanzania, to Alawi Ahmed. Jean-Pierre, over to you.
Thank you, David. Do you hear me?
Loud and clear. Loud and clear.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. I want to really thank the organizer of this Malaga platform, because putting local finance as a development finance is key. And you are right, David, when you say that unless we solve this issue, we are not serious about the implementation of our global agendas. It is very clear. And we wanted to address an issue that every mayor, many mayors have encountered. Them saying we have a project, but we can't find money. And the investors saying, well, we have money, but we can't find a bankable project. So at the end, they decided that they will do it for themselves. And they say we'll be creating a special purpose vehicle for ourselves to go to the market, the capital market, in two ways. And you are right to say that there are now, after having had improved on source revenue, it should allow us then to go to the capital market domestically and even internationally, or to be attractive to equity finance. You are right. But to do that, in our African, there is an African tale that says, what you do for me, without me, you do it against me. And this is why the local government, subnational and local government of Africa choose to put in place a cooperative society, bringing them together to have a minimum. Hello, there is an interaction here.
We can hear you.
Okay. Bringing these people together, they want to create this African Territorial Agency. They will gather 10 million euros and go and fetch for 10 million more to have a capital of this African Territorial Agency of 20 million. And based on that, to go to the market or to go to equity finance for the local government of Africa. And of course, we are also trying to get this ATA recognized as an agency for the Green Climate Fund. And we are now working with UNCDF to have UNCDF help us study the risk of this instrument and try to implement it with the support of the UN system. And frankly, we really appreciate the help that you are bringing. And many local governments in Africa expect that this tool will be implemented sooner than later. And what we envision is to have this tool issuing its first bond at latest 2025. So I send a message to our local government to come and put the money. We have already 50 cities that have committed. We want at least 100. And we want them to fill this society by the end of this year, so that we start running with this project and stop meetings and start implementation. Thank you. I'm sorry, but I have to go. I know that there are follow-up questions, but I'm happy to respond to them in writing, but I have to catch a flight.
Well noted, Jean-Pierre, and thank you so much for your intervention. And I think it came at a very timely moment, because we'll come back to that in the conclusions as the type of institution we need to create. We are fully behind you to support this. And I'm going now to safe travels, safe flight to you, sir. I'm now going to go to back to Tanzania to Mr. Alawi Ahmed, the Project Resource Mobilization Coordinator of the Tangan Urban Water Supply and Sanitation Authority. Just to say a couple of words, I think Peter Manika already introduced this bond to us, but again, to make the connections, because if the African Territorial Agency were to exist, and there were to be this pooled financing arrangement across Africa, of course, given the regulatory requirements and licenses in different countries, your bond might be the type of instrument it could invest in. So again, connecting the dots of this ecosystem we're trying to create. Over to you, Mr. Alawi Ahmed, briefly for any final comments complementing what Peter has already said on the Tanga Urban Water Bond in Tanzania. Over. If your microphone is, if you're able to speak now, or shall we move on? Alawi Ahmed? I think we'll move on. So that was a good intervention from Jean-Pierre Mbassi. We're very grateful for him for squeezing us in to his agenda. And we can see, the market is there for this type of pooled financing vehicle. So we've talked about intergovernmental fiscal transfers. We've talked about own source revenue. We're talking about local mobilization of domestic capital. So now I'd like to come on to the concept of direct catalytic lending to local governments. And I'd like to ask Sharu Singhal, the investment specialist of the Least Developed Countries platform, to take the floor. And Sharu, I'm going to just, in the context of the conversation, I'm just going to put two very quick questions to you. You know, again, as we mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, when the Malaga Coalition was founded, there was not really dedicated debt funds for local governments, but we're now creating the city's bridge. We're already starting negotiating lending to Chef Chuen, and we have the Honorable Mayor online. But through the city's bridge and through the Least Developed Countries investment platform, the intention is to lend to many more. And we've heard already from the various contributors that, you know, if a city of 500,000 people can generate own source revenue of $5 million, there is scope there for responsible lending, for debt finance to leverage that own source revenue, either on the general obligation or tied to particular revenue streams. So from the, that's the demand side, and you're speaking from the supply side. Any comments as an investment specialist, Sharu, in terms of the potential of building this portfolio of direct loans to local governments across Africa and Asia and Latin America? Over to you, Sharu.
Thank you, David, and thank you for the opportunity to be amongst this very illustrious panel. It's a pleasure to be here. Nan, I'm happy to share my screen if that's okay, because maybe, or never mind, I think this is even better. It reduces my work. Thank you for that. All right, so I just thought it's you know, sometimes visuals help in explaining things more clearly. So if you allow me, I wanted to just take you through a little bit about, as David said, the direct catalytic lending support that UNCDF can provide or is providing. So Lan, could you go on to the next slide, please? Excellent, thank you. So maybe I want to just start here from a context perspective, and David, I will come to you answering your question as a result of these slides. You know, we see that there is a gap in the development finance architecture. On one hand, if you look at this graph, on the left-hand side, it represents, you know, companies, or not companies, but projects, which could be from low risk to high risk. And then depending on the size of the projects, from small to large in size. We see that, and I think, you know, we see that on one hand, we have grant funding of different types, which is more risk friendly. You know, it can take can be put into high risk projects, can be put even into smaller size projects. But we also know that grant funding is more limited. But on the other hand, more commercial type of capital, which is available in larger sizes, is typically more risk averse. In this graph itself, you see that these circles move more towards a low risk to medium risk type of project, requiring medium or higher levels of capital. So as a result, there is a gap, which is a need for capital which has more risk appetite. Nan, could you just move forward to the next slide, please? Thank you. And UNCDF sees this gap by virtue of us being on the ground, interacting with all of you. We see this gap very closely, and we intend to play a role in facilitating the bridging of this gap based on our own unique positioning. And so we have two types of offerings here in the yellow and the green, as you see. More risk-friendly concessional financing, which is directly offered by UNCDF, which is a bridge facility, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Or financing which can be provided indirectly through UNCDF's partnerships with third-party fund managers, like David alluded to earlier. The International Municipal Investment Fund is a great example of that. So moving on to the next slide, please. Okay, so, you know, I know this looks like a very complicated slide. Apologies for that, but really it's not as complex. I'm happy to explain you, or take you through it. UNCDF really seeks to provide a continuum of support. Actually, there's a typo on this slide. It's Bridge and IMIF, to offer an investment continuum for local governments and other projects in LDCs. And what we're trying to show here is how UNCDF works on the ground and could work in the future with local governments to support their growth journey. So let's take an example. You saw in the previous slide the two boxes with colors yellow and green, yellow representing more of what UNCDF can do through its direct interventions financially. So UNCDF could, as you see the top arrows on the left hand side, you start with projects from their growth journey of either being a smaller, more startup type to more developed projects as you move towards the right. And then again, on the extreme left is our own UNCDF sourcing capability, which really comes from our interactions with mayors, with municipalities on the ground. So through these interactions that we have, we come to know, and we are in the know of a lot of requirements for financing that are on the ground. So UNCDF could provide a grant, which could be seed money, to support the project, and we could do that to make the project feasible. Now, sometimes the project may also be revenue generating and may be able to take on debt to finance the project. However, here, as we all know, projects face challenges in obtaining the requisite debt from banks and external financiers, either because these external financiers and banks have high collateral requirements, or largely because they have limited risk appetites. And this is where UNCDF, through its bridge facility, can provide the responsive capital, concessional loans, or guarantees to A, bridge the financing gap for the project, B, enable the project as well as the local government or the municipality to build credit history, which they can showcase for future rounds of funding, and C, to crowd in private capital. Now, it's important to understand that concessionality could be in various manners, again, because of UNCDF's unique positioning. The concessionality could be in terms of pricing, which is the interest rate. It could also be structurally, wherein UNCDF can absorb more risk, which makes the project more feasible, therefore, for an external bank or any other financier to come in. And we expect that as these projects grow in size and they have larger financing needs, they would no longer need this concessional financing, but we may need more larger equity type support. Again, David alluded to that in his opening remarks. And this is where the IMIF fund could provide the right responsive capital through equity. And this is what UNCDF's objective has always been, which is to connect projects with commercial investors, which you see on the extreme right in the market. That is our holy grail, and that is our objective. Finally, I also want to highlight that our support goes far beyond capital. We recognize the deep need for technical assistance, and all of our interventions are typically accompanied by targeted technical assistance for the project, again, depending on the needs of the project. And UNCDF has the processes today. We have the tools, the competence, and the ability to offer this type of targeted support to municipal projects and to local governments. And we are very excited to work deeper in this area. And our investment platform, in fact, has a dedicated team of investment specialists like myself, both in New York as well as in country in Africa, who each come with several decades of experience in financing. And we are very well positioned to provide this type of financing support to municipalities and to projects. So David, to come back to your question, what do we see as a potential of building a portfolio? I mean, we see a strong potential there, projects which are well structured, which can indeed start repaying small amounts of loans. We see that there could be a very good fit with the bridge facility, wherein we could provide that sort of support, help the projects and the municipalities build credit history, and really crowd in other financiers to come in as a result of that. Because one of the things which reduces risk perception on any external financier is to see, have they paid the loans before? Have they taken on a debt and paid them well? So we see a strong potential on this, and we're very excited to move forward. Back to you, David.
Thank you so much indeed, Sharu. Really well noted. And again, connecting the contributions. So we already heard from the city of the city of Musoki, sorry, the city of Nansana in Uganda, about their $5 million revenue based on 500,000 people. And I think we can see from what you've said that concessional lending from UNCDF, maybe together with a domestic bank, or can help to build that credit history that would then enable that city to move forwards into slightly more ambitious types of structures, and perhaps even eventually issue some kind of a bond. So I think we'll come back to you at the end, Honorable Mayor of Nansana, to ask you to reflect a little bit on what you've heard so far, and reflect on the type of projects that, you know, it might be possible for you to combine a combination of your own source revenue, other sources of income to put together, and the projects themselves could, of course, generate revenue, which would also lead to local economic development. And that revenue stream from the project can also be part of the repayment of any financing package. So it's all about transformative finance. And I think this has been a really good intervention, Sharu, to show that things are now out there that were not there a few years ago. The city's bridge being one of them. And we hope to open up a portfolio of lending directly to local governments, in addition to and bringing in these third parties. And the fact that we can be a city-friendly lender that understands the nature of municipal finance will be key to this. And with that, I'd now like to bring in our colleagues from UN Habitat and UNCDF again, in terms of the city-friendly investment pipeline. So we have this at the first, on your agenda, this is the first building block that is referred there. And so Mohammed and David, I understand you're sitting together there in Nairobi, and you're negotiating the investment process for the pipeline management of this city-friendly investment pipeline. And we've already heard from Jean-Pierre Mbassi, from Emilia, from Maimuna, from Priti at the beginning about what we're trying to achieve. And we've heard now from a number of cities about the possibilities. So any thoughts? Over to you, Mohammed and David. And again, in the spirit of a conversation rather than a presentation, any thoughts from what you've heard? Do you feel you can populate the city investment facility and this city-friendly investment pipeline based on what you've heard? And of course, you might want to advertise the fact that we'll be discussing this at WUF as well. And then after you two, we're going to move to some of the other instruments, including I'll call in Mr. Salim Bensal, the Executive Director of the Urban Resilience Fund, which is AKA the International Municipal Investment Fund. So we'll be talking to you soon. And then later on, we're going to look at the financial intermediaries that can help to make this happen. So we're going to come to Professor Paul Smoke, Rajivan, and others looking at the financial intermediaries in country that are really required to make this happen at scale. And then and in that we'll also come to Komotso on the capacity, and then we'll finish with some responses by some of the key actors. So I think if you think that we're trying to finish by 11, we still have an hour. So let's try and finish ahead of time, but just to give you the sequence of what's happening next. But in terms of the pipeline, now let's focus on the pipeline. David and Mohammed, any thoughts from your side? Over.
David, I think he wanted to go first. Okay, so David, maybe I start then first. So thank you so much. Hello, colleagues. Good afternoon from Nairobi. It is UNCDF and UN Habitat actually in one room, formulating the city investment facility. And the specific topic is the actual pipeline. It is our belief that a fused offering of UNCDF and UN Habitat that responds to the specific problems that have been identified so far throughout this discussion today, and the challenges related to the supply and the demand side, through this fused offering will provide a platform, will provide the tools and the solutions in order to develop a pipeline of viable, financeable, but most importantly, transformative investments that can respond to the immediate needs of cities, unlock the flow of capital from domestic and international markets to these infrastructure projects, taking into consideration the fiscal constraints that currently exist in countries and the increasing fiscal crises that many cities and local governments have to deal with, especially in the increasing food crisis and fuel crisis. So we all understand that we cannot solve these infrastructure problems without increasing the flows of capital from private and regional and domestic markets to these infrastructure projects. In that process, our fused offering really lies on 4 specific, let's say, objectives. First, we're working with the cities and local governments, joining our decades of joint experiences in local government planning, in supporting local government and cities, in prioritizing infrastructure development. And we talked about on-source revenue in terms of fiscal management, to try to identify priority projects in the sourcing stages, where such projects will undergo very specific technical project preparation that is undertaken by UNCDF through key investment process and investment officers on the ground, as well as partners that we have basically partnered with, both UNCDF and UN Habitat on the ground now for many years. The idea is, of course, to help the cities and local governments to structure these projects, undertake full due diligence, de-risk them, and get them to an investment readiness stage. And that investment readiness stage is the main, let's say, goal in order for us to unlock the resources from domestic, regional, international financiers. There's a lot of projects, David, and we've heard this before. There's a lot of projects out there. Problem is that you don't have enough investment ready stage projects that are attractive to investors. And that is what we are trying to achieve through this fused offering, getting investment to investment readiness stage. At the same time, we have developed a whole range of financiers and partners and development partners that are ready to invest into this fused offering and the pipeline of investments we have generated. For example, you have mentioned the International Municipal Investment Fund as one vehicle, as one vehicle that would be ready to invest equity, for example, into some of these projects that we're able to bring to investment readiness. And there are other mechanisms, other blended tools and instruments that we can deploy and partners to bring in crowd in order to get the financing ready for the cities and local governments. Most importantly, David, and this is our common belief, it has to be at terms that are favorable to the local government and cities. It's not just about any type of financing. It has to make financial sense to the local government and in a sustainable manner. Number 3, we are able to provide our advisory services to the city, not just on the pipeline preparation, but also on the legal aspects of the projects, on the regulatory, on the reforms. And so the whole system really is integrated in a long-term sustainability plan that is not just focused on one project, but can be then in the future be scaled to a pool of investments and projects and capacities within cities and local government to access capital flows and access capital markets. So that is the kind of city advisory services that we're able to provide. And the last piece of it is really building long-term relationships with investors and partners that, again, be able to bring the capital down to the cities, but then they also become basically financiers that can consider additional projects as the portfolio would grow. And finally, and that's the last piece of it, is the knowledge, the South-South exchange and learning. We want to bring through this process so that cities can learn from each other, cities can teach each other, and cities can leverage each other resources and experiences. So you have a learning portfolio that can be replicated across sectors, across different financial models, and be scaled not just in Africa, but in Asia, and compare it into other regions, Latin America and the Middle East and others. So that is, in a nutshell, basically, David, the fused offering of the City Investment Facility. We will have structured city investment and integrated portals that will be available to cities to bring their investments and pipelines forward. We will have structured advisory services and structured brokerage and partnership development with financiers, and a knowledge learning portfolio that learns from each other and enhances South-South. Over to you, David, if you're online.
Thank you, Mohammed. Very clear. David, I mean, this is a fused presentation. I know you're sitting very close to each other. So, David, do you want to complement that? And then we're going to go to, just so the speakers are ready, we'll be then going to Komotso, and then I think we move to Lars from the European Union. But David, over to you first.
Thanks very much, David. Yeah, we're working together. I had to nip back to my office for something briefly and then got disconnected. So I'm sorry to have missed what Mohammed said. But basically, yeah, this is a fused offering. It's an opportunity for us to try and connect the dots between the capital that's out there and potentially available to cities for SDG investments and the cities' portfolios themselves. And through three interlinked areas, the portal, which allows cities, investors to know what the pipelines are that are emerging, and then the advisory, which looks at the SDG qualities of these projects, but also the financial preparation of them, and then finally vehicles then that take reasonably well prepared projects forwarded with first loss capital, and then brokers, other investors. Then we try to sort of bridge that gap between finance that's out there and the financing needs of cities. But it's absolutely important, and I'm really glad that this session is looking at different types of financing, because it's so important that we don't look at investment without also looking at revenue and governance and other issues that make cities prepared as viable investment partners. But just to add to this as well, I think something that we'll bring up during the World Urban Forum is the idea that, and also we reflected on this earlier with Mohammed and your team, that, you know, when you prepare projects, it's a very costly process, but once you've prepared one kind of product, then preparing it again for a different context or even a similar context is much easier. So we're starting to propose to create a kind of a global good, a repository of practices on well-prepared projects and projects that have been financed, so that we bring that knowledge loop back into to future projects and possibly reduce some of the costs of preparing projects because that knowledge is captured. So we'd like to sort of propose that as a kind of a global good for cities and sources of investment. But also, you know, it's key for us that we're investing in small and intermediary cities. I mean, as our executive director mentioned at the start, urbanization, the massive urban growth expected in the next 30 years needs to be distributed not just to the hundreds of big cities, but to the thousands of smaller and intermediary cities. And sometimes their investment needs might be met, or some of the investment needs might be met by sort of aggregating portfolios. So if we understand the investment priorities of several cities in a country, then maybe there's a way of then grouping them together, the group of cities that might need street lighting, another group of cities that might need buses, and to aggregate portfolios to simplify and reach cost efficiencies on procurement. So there's a few sort of low-hanging fruit that we're also looking at to improve the effectiveness, particularly for small cities, to be able to also benefit from investment sources that might be out there. So I'll leave it there, and thanks again for this fantastic conference and meeting of minds and experiences. Look forward to seeing you at World Urban Forum in a couple of weeks, where we're going to take this conversation further. So thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, David. And I think, you know, that was a really good segue into the next speaker, that will be Komotso Letsatsi from South Africa. a municipal finance consultant and a good friend of this coalition. And, you know, we've been hearing a lot. The pipeline management system is there with UN Habitat and UNCDF fused offering. We've heard a lot about from the cities themselves about what is actually possible. And Komotso, people say, again, coming back to the point that was made at the beginning by Emilia Sayers, this is a meeting of minds. It's a coalition of the willing, of the believers, if you like, even though the institutions we sit in might not always believe it. Of course, ours does as UNCDF, I'm proud to say, but not everybody believes that local government finance is development finance, because a lot of people believe local governments simply don't have the capacity. Komotso, as somebody who spent many years training local governments in this kind of thing, do they have the capacity, or are we all dreaming? Over to you.
Thank you very much, David. And it's afternoon in Johannesburg, around it's 4 o'clock. So definitely we do have capacity. And you know, in South Africa, it actually took a while, maybe just to quickly share that we've got 3 spheres of government. So we've got the national, provincial, and then local government, but they're all independent. So the 2 spheres, top spheres, are more on monitoring and oversight in terms of performance, but the actual delivery of services and infrastructure, it's all basically sitting at a local government level. So it took a while, I guess, for the nation to actually really appreciate the importance of local government, that if you have a dysfunctional local government in every sense of the way, whether it's the failing infrastructure or poor governance, then the whole country basically is at risk. And I'm happy that there's now appreciation in terms of the significance and importance of local government, that everything happens in local government. Everyone lives in a municipal jurisdiction. So what we've seen in South Africa is that in early 2000s, the national government basically passed a legislation to create an enabling environment for local government to basically raise funding in debt capital markets purely for the purpose of basically rolling out infrastructure. And my former employer, where I spent almost 10 years as a group treasurer in the city of Johannesburg issuing bonds, that we've actually proven to the whole country that it is indeed possible. And really, and the benefit of all of that was that it also instilled a sense of market discipline, in the sense that if you issue a bond on an annual basis, you have to go present yourself in front of investors, and they ask very tough questions because your credit rating must actually be an investment grade. So if there are challenges, and it becomes a feeding system between the investors and basically in the issuers, then it also gives an opportunity for the municipality itself to actually look at itself from a different perspective, which is an investor perspective, in terms of key principles that you basically have to have in place to access monies from borrowers. So the capacity is built basically over time. It was not an overnight success. And now we're sitting in South Africa with a situation where we've got over around $7 billion that has basically been issued at this point in time from investors, either from debt capital markets in the form of bonds. You would be aware that in 2014, we issued the first listed green bond on the stock exchange, the city of Johannesburg, while I was basically there. We actually led a whole lot of municipalities in the country, and a lot are all actually following in that particular footstep. So there are pockets of excellence. And I think in South Africa, we've got quite enough case studies to basically indicate that it could actually be done. And maybe something that I basically need to share with where we are in the cycle of basically issuing bonds, that what has become very apparent, even in this particular instance as we speak now, is that local government is a pipeline of bankable projects or infrastructure projects to be financed, but we haven't really built the capacity to actually put together bankable projects. So we've had instances where the infrastructure units would not necessarily actually work with the finance units, but even from a recruitment point of view, we haven't really recruited people with investment banking kind of an understanding. what it actually takes to actually build a project such that you can prepare it and basically take it to the market. So a lot of it has basically been more general obligation, even if it's for infrastructure and for development purposes, but it's more balance sheet risk, not necessarily project finance risk. So there is a huge opportunity from international DFIs to actually share and capacitate local government to actually move to other sources of basically financing infrastructure to basically close the infrastructure gap and the deteriorating infrastructure. So definitely, I think there is a positive story. In a nutshell, David, as you are aware, I know you understand the South African market and you've basically seen it over time, and we share experiences throughout the country and basically globally. And we've seen the importance of fiscal decentralization to allow local government to build balance sheets in terms of investing in infrastructure, as well in terms of revenue generation, ability to collect their own revenues and levy taxes, which becomes then a prerequisite for investors from a sustainability point of view. The importance of governance, good audit outcomes, accounting for transactions basically properly, looking after the repairs and maintenance around the infrastructure, all of that becomes very important when you look at the credit quality of local government, which is what investors basically demand over and above, the political leadership, the leadership in municipalities, and just understanding overall strategic focus. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Kamat. So no, that's really clear. And I'd like to highlight a couple of points that you made and connect them to what was said by Mohammed and Difid earlier. So first, of course, you spoke about the distinction between general obligation borrowing, or where essentially it's on the balance sheet of the whole local government, and then project finance, where it's tied to the revenue from a particular project. So that's a very important distinction. And of course, you need a bit of both if you're going to have the full ecosystem, but the two are very different. And you also talked about the importance of intergovernmental fiscal transfers, which was also really good because it again reconnected us to what we talked about earlier in this meeting. And I'd like to come back to that. A lot of people reduce this whole conversation to we need more bankable projects. It's not that. It's much bigger than that. The bankable projects can be a Holiday Inn, a luxury shopping mall, a seaside resort. They are bankable projects, and they are taking place anyway. If you drive around places, you will see bankable projects popping up all over the place. It's about transformative projects that are financeable. And in order to make these transformative projects financeable, you do need the investor focus you've talked about, Kamat. So you do need that investment discipline. Yes, you do need to attract bank financing to them, but you also need the intergovernmental fiscal transfers. You also need the own source revenue. You also need the local public financial management. You need this whole ecosystem that we are talking about. So I think that's very important that we understand it the way you've put it, and that it then becomes part of the national development agenda as it starts to do in South Africa. And it's not simply about bankable projects for 100% commercial finance, because they happen anyway, but they're not transformative. And the scale that's needed needs transformation, because when you look at the growth of cities and the scale of infrastructure investment, it needs these new vehicles. So in order to make the jump between bankable and transformative, there needs to be various mechanisms in place, and one of which is a guarantee. And that can help to bring comfort to investors. It can help to provide elements of credit enhancement. It can even be deployed to make something that is merely bankable now transformative. And with that in mind, I'd like to call on Lars Gronveld from the European Commission. And we're delighted to hear that the European Commission has recently looked at this idea of city guarantee funds that can address this point that I'm making, help to drive this ecosystem, what we've all been talking about in this meeting, and not just look at bankable projects, but look at transformative projects. And fortunately, there are also others who are starting to look at this space of guarantees or the type of investments we're talking about, both small scale and large scale. So Lars, the floor is yours. Any comments from what you've heard so far? Over to you.
Thanks a lot, David. First of all, very interesting with this multitude of initiatives, and as you say, this development there's been about approaches to local level finance. I think from our side, maybe just to make one remark before jumping into the guarantee, as this is a specific issue. If you see from our side as a major donor, we've just been through our programming period for the next 7 years, 2021 to 2027. And what we've seen is a much larger focus or representation of targeting urban development, not coming out as a priority, this is what we want to do, but something that has been at the countryside selected at areas of intervention, i.e. as to achieve our development objective or the development objectives, it needs to engage with the local authorities. It needs to engage at urban development and cities. And what goes hand in hand with that is also that it's very much reaching out to the secondary cities and saying this is the target to bring investment to these secondary cities. And they are starting to look for how can we actually finance this. Yeah, so very much appreciate this discussion of these initiatives. And this is driven what we can call through our national engagement and national program, which is our backbone of these engagement. But one instrument here that you call upon our guarantees comes as is what seems a complement to this here. And let me go into this. That means already in the last, what say we say, program period, we started launching what is called the European Fund for Sustainable Development, providing both blended finance and guarantees to attract additional finance, of course, with a view to address this financing gap. It's not specifically targeted to cities, but it actually works with a number of investment windows. There's agriculture, there's a focus on energy, connectivity, digital, SMEs, but there is a dedicated windows in this here, in this guarantee instrument to sustainable cities, as we did in the last period, and which is now again launched as the European Fund for Sustainable Development Plus. And the plus comes from we are trying to expand it geographically. That means it covers both Africa neighborhood, that means EU neighborhood, Latin America and Asia, and it has been scaled very much up in size. At the moment, we have launched, let me say how it works. It's not that we provide a guarantee to a user of this guarantee. We will work through eligible development finance institution that has been pre-selected and vetted with their approaches to how to use and deploy such guarantees. And these DFIs can then submit proposals to the European Commission, proposing a programmatic approach targeting a number of countries and proposing some specific guarantee instruments, how this here could be used. This will then be assessed with which countries are targeted, the services, the degree of transformativeness, etc., to select which program we go forward with. So at the moment, we are still in a quite open period as this bid for proposal is out, and there will come proposals in July, and there will be a much better idea of how this, where this will take shape. But a few things, maybe just to, I think people know how a guarantee works, but some of the things we could see, and we have seen proposed how this here could be used and to link up to some of the discussion there's been. One could be in the context of PPPs. That means in a BRT, having someone investing in the infrastructure, but actually bringing in a private operator, bringing in the rolling material, and they are deploying a guarantee to attract people to be willing to bid to such a BRT and reduce the cost of such a, or the risk in such a concession, and then get better terms to operate. That could be one element we have seen as proposals. The other could be having local banks extending more credit to cities directly. This happens in some countries and is feasible in more, but maybe not to the full scale. And a guarantee might help to unlock such a market by demonstrating to the banks that this is actually less risky than it necessarily potentially is, and it could develop longer maturities or extend lending to currently unserved cities, and in some way help to create such a market. That would be another way to use that guarantees. But here we are basically calling on the inventiveness of the market and the DFIs that come back and say, what is it that is needed how can we deploy this guarantee? How can we actually use it in a transformative way? And of course, also bring it to, what should we say, not the projects that already maybe are what should we say, financeable, but really bring it out to new areas that extend the application and access to finance. As I said, it's not, and I think it's important to register, it's not a specific instrument for cities. It's an instrument for guarantees and also for the private sector, etc. And that means there's a bit of competition. And as we discussed here, the urban area or the cities are a complex area. There are many institutional constraints. There are many capacity constraints. It's projects that often take longer time to develop. And obviously, when such a bid puts in, the DFI will say, this is what we can achieve. So there is, there can be a tendency to go for the, what should we say, easier development project, etc. So also the comments that if can make reference to make more standardized procedure to reduce the time of creating such project, to reduce the risk of actually bringing project up to where they could be financeable, I also think is a very important element of supporting this. Lastly, just to mention, along with this instrument comes also the TA to the party or the DFI that will manage these guarantees to help develop and deploy and help to develop a portfolio and structure these mechanisms. So it's not just the guarantee. The guarantee as such one have to pay for, but the TA will help to structure these. And the interest in using the guarantee, I think, is from our side. I'm coming from a thematic unit on urban development. Very welcome, because I think it needs such initiatives to demonstrate that actually through this focus on cities, through the use of guarantees and through use of blended finance, it can actually help to bring transformative projects forward and as a way to of course reach the SDGs. So very much strong support to this dialogue and this debate here, and I very much enjoyed the discussion. Over to you.
David, I think you're on mute.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Lars, for that. And I like the way you talk about making, merely bankable projects transformative, or using this to open up these new exciting areas, but also you highlight the challenges. And of course, as we mentioned at the beginning, there's a reason why DFIs are not in this space. There's a reason why not everybody is a believer that local government finance is development finance. And there's a reason why people seem to believe that SMEs is by simply looking at SME finance, short-term, 5-year exits, whereas with a lot of the money that we're talking about, it's 5-year repayment holiday rather than the 5-year maturity. It's a big difference. And as you see in the publication we highlighted, we make the point that you cannot transform the world through SME finance alone. There needs to be this enabling infrastructure in place. And a lot of that is at the local level. And that's why, in addition to working with some of the well-known impact investment industry, etc., there are lots of institutions around that now. It's a big part of financing for development. There has also to be this local infrastructure component, which was part of the original intention of the Addis Ababa Action Agreement and the New Urban Agenda, but never quite came to fruition. Now, perhaps it is. And with that, I'm going to hand the floor over to Salim Bensmail, who is the Executive Director of the Urban Resilience Fund, which is also for the non-OECD countries known as the International Municipal Investment Fund. And this is the equity fund that was spoken about at the beginning of the meeting that was actually born from this coalition. In fact, a number of the things that we're talking about were born out of this coalition and are instruments of the coalition as part of this ecosystem we're trying to build. So welcome on board, Salim. I wanted to leave you until towards the end, so give you a chance to absorb everything that is being said. Welcome to the Malaga Coalition as one of our instruments. And I wonder what your thoughts are, given what you've heard so far. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, David, and hello to everyone and all the distinguished speakers and panelists today. So maybe just very briefly about myself. So I am, as you mentioned, an executive director at Meridium. Meridium is a Paris-based infrastructure investment firm. It was one of the first players in this space to develop and invest in greenfield infrastructure projects in Africa. And we are very proud, honored to be a partner of UNCDF as the fund managers for the International Municipal Investment Fund. And together with my colleague, Emmanuel Nasbridier, whom I believe many of you know, I oversee our activities with respect to urban resilience and the supporting the development of infrastructure in cities and municipalities. So I especially liked the phrase that you used to describe the instrument, which was long-term city-friendly equity investors, because I think the terms in that phrase capture very well all of the challenges that we're trying to address and part of the solutions to those challenges. Obviously, at Meridian, we feel that equity investors have a key role to play in supporting the agenda that we're discussing today. I think generally speaking, even outside of the places that we're discussing, there's a very strong alignment between equity investors and public sector entities in the development of projects. I think that alignment is often misunderstood, underrated, but it is actually very strong. So we believe that part of what makes infrastructure projects successful around the world is the ability to rely on infrastructure equity investors. But obviously, you don't want just any kind of investors, and in your phrase, you mentioned a couple of other points. You mentioned long-term and city-friendly, and I think these are important considerations. The ability to genuinely invest on a long-term basis, I think, is key in the sector of infrastructure. It's very much at the heart of the DNA of Meridian as an organization. We were founded almost 15 or 16 years ago. We've never sold an asset to this day. So we genuinely invest for the long haul. And I think that's the key to successful infrastructure investing. And it's especially key in the urban space with cities and municipalities that we're talking about, because the ability to have a long-term horizon is what creates the space to accommodate the business models and the economic models that will make projects sustainable for cities. I think a previous panelist mentioned the importance that these projects needed to be in the interest of the cities themselves, and the ability to adopt a long-term horizon, I think, is crucial, because it gives us the flexibility to be creative and to be creative about the business models and the economic models of projects. You mentioned city-friendly, and I think that's important, because what is at the heart of the International Municipal Investment Fund is this idea that you need to bring to the market an investor proposition that is very aligned with the constraints and the challenges that cities face. And certainly this is what we've tried to do with UNCDF through the fund. If you think about what makes projects in cities special, and we've heard about this today, I think there are a couple of things. The first is they generally are relatively small in size in comparison to some of the more national infrastructure projects. And the ability to have a fund that is dedicated to municipal projects is important, because that means that municipal and city projects aren't competing for our attention with larger, maybe more easily accessible projects. So that's a really important component of the fund's proposition. The second challenge that you typically face in cities is that from an traditional investor perspective, these projects are perceived as having a challenging risk-return profile, and the fund that we're developing with UNCDF is a blended finance fund, which is probably, to my knowledge, the first of its kind, where blended finance is actually embedded into the fund. So we have 3 tranches of investors, and the purpose of this is to make it possible to bring traditional investors to municipal infrastructure projects in the countries that we're talking about, and that will be key, because it will be going forward the ability to access the huge pool of capital that is available out there in the world to finance infrastructure projects. The ability to access that pool of capital is the real the grail that we should be after, because that will mean that we've succeeded in making these projects accessible. And finally, there's an added layer with projects in city, an added layer of complexity of, and I think people were mentioning the difficulty of creating bankable projects. And I understand, as David yourself, you mentioned that that's not the only game in town. There are other things we should be doing, but certainly the ability to have an investment fund, an investor that is willing to engage at an earlier stage to support the preparation of projects, to bring them to market, I think is extremely valuable, and I think is one of the keys to unlocking investment in infrastructure in municipalities. And this is very much the historical DNA of Meridiam. It's clearly at the center of the mandate that we're given with the International Municipal Investment Fund, and so we're very much looking forward to moving into the operational phase of this very exciting project.
Well noted, Salim, and really great comments about the challenging risk-return ratio, and therefore the long-term equity hold, and how that enables that to be addressed, but also about your broader intervention. So we're very happy. I think the comments you made really fit nicely into the context of this meeting. And I think, going back to this bankable, transformative, the word we like to use is financeable. So, something can be transformative and bankable. The main thing is it's financeable. So, and that includes being able to be financeable by the IMF. It may be financeable through a domestic bond. It may be financeable sustainably through fiscal revenues, if it's a public finance type of entity, or maybe through fiscal transfers. For example, the local climate adaptive living facility, we aim for that to become a way for global, for example, global fiscal transfers, maybe a tax on aviation fuel that can then flow to local governments for adaptation, which can be part of providing the public input into a private finance in projects. So there's a whole system that needs to be built. And I think that the IMF is a key part of it, and this long-term city-friendly patient equity that you've described is very important. So thank you so much, and we really look forward to working with you on this now. And with that in mind, I think I'm now going to give the floor to Paul Smoke, who is the Professor of Public Finance and Planning and the Director of the Global EMPA, which I think is a master's in public administration at New York University. And Paul, and then after you, I'm going to come to Rajivan, and who is the former CEO of the Tamil Nadu Urban Development Fund. So Paul, and then following on Rajivan, any thoughts from your side on the financial intermediaries that are necessary at national level to enable this kind of investment to take place? So we heard a lot from Salim about the way the IMF is structured, the layers. Of course, it's based in Paris. We've heard from mayors about the way their revenues are structured, and we've heard with 500,000 people, you can get $5 million a year. That is significant if one thinks about the potential for blended finance. And we've also heard from Tanzania on domestic market bonds, the Tanga water bond, etc. But within countries, what are the institutions that can knot these things together? And some countries do have kind of subnational development banks that would work with all of these interlocutors that we've heard about so far, that would be working with Salim, would be working with the mayors we've heard from, would be working with the domestic capital markets. So Paul, any thoughts from your side on what you've heard so far? And then I'm going to come to Rajivan after you. Over to you, Paul.
Thanks very much, David, and thanks to everyone for the very interesting discussion. If it's okay, David, I'm going to say something about special financial intermediaries, but I also want to link this back to the larger discussion that we've been hearing. And I think just to reinforce that countries need a spectrum of development finance instruments that serve the varied needs of diverse subnational governments and development projects. You need to have incentives that try to push wealthier subnational governments, certainly for self-financing projects, to the market. And you also need mechanisms, as people have suggested, for financially weak subnational governments to get grants for non-self-financing projects that serve disadvantaged populations. And in between, there's many different needs that can be financed by closer to market loans, somewhat subsidized loans, of which special financial intermediaries are a part. And I think that one can also argue, which it comes out a bit in the UNCDF approach, the need for a carefully structured mix of loans and grants that help to build a credit history for subnational governments. But I think let's not forget that this needs to be based on a national intergovernmental policy framework for it to be sustainable. The efforts of development partners and other actors can help pilot mechanisms that serve as a basis for developing a sound governmental framework, but this really needs to be part of the intergovernmental system. Now, on the special financial intermediaries, there are many types of country-level SFIs, and there have been some new efforts on this front. Now, I think we need to recognize that historically, many of these have not performed well or have even failed and closed. And I think that some reformers haven't learned from the ones that have worked. I still see, that what I'm hearing today is very encouraging, but with some of the big international agencies, I still see some reluctance or at least inadequate enthusiasm, despite the recognized need for development finance at the subnational level to support these. And also, getting private sector financiers in, which is an important part of making these special financial intermediaries work, has also been difficult in many cases. But I think it's really important to highlight that the performance issues of these special financial intermediaries have largely been a matter of the way they've been organized and managed. And I won't go into the details here, but we can later if you want to. But I think the bottom line is that these special financial intermediaries hit a spot in the middle, which is in many countries the bulk of subnational governments. And the concept itself is sound and can be made to work, but the mistakes of the past in terms of how they're managed and organized need to be understood and remedied. And special financial intermediaries are also going to need guarantees, pooling, and other mechanisms to help support their activities. Just one final point, if I may, just to really highlight the point that the special financial intermediaries, none of this borrowing is going to work without a good intergovernmental fiscal system. And we all know that. It's been said. I've been doing this for almost 40 years. It's been said many times over the years, but there's still a lot of fragmentation in how fiscal decentralization has been approached, despite the inherent relationships and interdependencies among own source revenues, transfers, and borrowings. The development finance angle is more prominent now than in the past, but I mean, we've talked for decades about better transfers and local fiscal space, and in some cases, these things are not structured well. there have been some countries, actually, people don't recognize this, have too many transfers. Subnational governments can't spend the money. I know that's not the norm, but again, it gets to the idea of the importance of how transfers are set up. And especially if you don't have clarity about subnational government responsibilities and sufficient accountability mechanisms to push subnational governments to do what they should be doing. Some countries have development transfers and special financial intermediary loans for infrastructure, but not adequate transfers and revenue sources to operate and maintain the infrastructure that's financed by these development transfers or loan finance projects of SFIs. Transfers can waste resources, even discourage subnational government borrowing and revenue collection if they're not well structured with proper incentives. So understanding the nature and obstacles to the intergovernmental fiscal space reform and how to make strategic advances is critical if genuine and sustainable progress is to be made. These things need to be considered together. And learning from how some subnational governments, as we've heard from some of the colleagues today, have made progress despite issues with the system in their country is important. One very last point I just want to throw on the table, I don't want to throw a wrench into things, but I think it's important to recognize that some special purpose vehicles and PPPs can undermine subnational government integrated development planning. What is the governance relationship between the elected subnational governments with the formal legal responsibilities for these functions and the SPV? Do SPVs support and help develop the capacity of subnational governments or usurp their roles? I'll leave it at that.
Well, thank you, Paul. That's really important contributions. And I think that's why it has to be a city-friendly ecosystem. And that's where I think having this coalition is so important, because, again, speaking amongst friends, you know, the financing for development agenda, in some senses, is dominated by particular approaches. Whereas the financing for development agenda, if you read it, is very holistic and addresses, in fact, some of the issues you've raised. But you wouldn't get that from your typical financing for development by meeting or events, etc. It's all focused on particular types of private sector activity. Even in infrastructure finance, these connections you talk about are not necessarily made. And I think that's where it was so good that your contribution follows that of Salim and this concept of a city-friendly ecosystem. And I'm looking forward to hearing from later on in a couple of speakers' time, Mayor Sefiani from Chef Schwen, who will be talking about, you know, his perspective as a mayor and how the system needs to respond to local autonomy and local capacity. So really good points you make about the political economy of the PPPs and SPVs, etc. So thank you very, very much, Paul. So colleagues, we now have 30 minutes before the end of the meeting. And I'm going to have to take some executive action. I think it's been a very rich discussion. I didn't want to cut people off too much. I'm going to go to Rajivan in a moment and ask you to be really brief, Rajivan, on you're the former Chief Executive Officer of the Tamil Nadu Urban Development Fund, which is one of those institutions that we were talking about. That's a kind of intermediary institution in India, in Tamil Nadu state, that is supposed to drive local investments. So I'd just like you to speak very quickly to what you've heard so far. And then we have lined up Honorable Mohammed Sefiani, who the mayor of Chef Schwen in Morocco, who will give a mayor's response to what we've heard. We also have Professor Jeannie Birch from the University of Pennsylvania, I understand, who will give a response to what we've just heard. And at the closing, there will be Naveed Hanif, Assistant Secretary General for Economic Development at the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs. Because, of course, some of this will require changes in global regulations. And we need to start that discussion. And the place to start it is the UN, is the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, and that's the way to feed it into the Bretton Woods institutions, etc. So we'll be coming to Naveed Hanif towards the end. We also have a couple of other contributions from FMDV and also the Permanent Secretary of the Network of African Institutions for Local Government Financing, RIAFCO. So we have about 4 or 5 interventions left. So I'm going to ask the remaining interveners to be very brief, and I may start cutting people off, hopefully not. With that in mind, Rajivan, you're the former CEO of Tamil Nadu Urban Development Fund. What do you have to say from what you've heard so far? In 2 minutes, Rajivan, over to you.
Yeah, so in 2 minutes, do shut me up when the 2 minutes are over. So let's go at this from the perspective of the mayor. Here you are in a small city, $5 million total revenue, 500,000 people. Now, forget the consultant speak. There are 3 pillars with which you're working as a mayor. Your own source revenues, which we went into, maybe property tax, profession tax, money you get from upstairs, which your intergovernmental fiscal transfer, you add them together, subtract your expenditure and see what is my surplus. That's the beginning. Now, with my surplus, the mayor doesn't, it's not rocket science. First, there are municipal projects like street lights, pavements, which don't need debt. Then at the other end of the spectrum, there are things like parking lots, marriage halls, community holiday inns, which don't need municipal finance. They can be done through PPPs. So we have this bulk, huge missing middle: water, sanitation, environment-friendly stuff, climate-friendly stuff, which require long-term capital, which require debt financing, and as somebody, I think you said, requires 5 years as moratoriums, let alone. So the projects which are little street lights don't need this kind of effort. The projects which are PPPs don't need municipalities. It's this missing middle. And what do national policies, how can they create a borrowing framework for municipalities? One caveat: I can be a national government and say I don't believe in local governments. The government of Tajikistan says, I don't want Dushanbe to borrow. I will do it through my Russian-style SOEs. So those people are off our table. We're talking about where national governments are committed to a rational, predictable revenues framework, fiscal framework. If it's not rational or predictable year after year, nobody can lend to a city which says I get $100 this year and $200 next year. I can't do an Excel spreadsheet to find out how much the city can repay. So at the end of it, a lender has to get the money back. To get the money back, I have to know whether the money coming from upstairs is rational and stable, the money you collect from downstairs from your property tax is rational and stable, and your expenditures are stable. Then I can work out with my analysts, what's your surplus? And is that surplus enough to get my money back? That's the story of municipal finance for this missing middle. And we all agree in this table that no hope in hell of any city in Africa, Asia, Europe, America to do a 15-year water treatment plant, a stormwater drain or sewerage without long-term money. So that's also, we're all agreed on any of that. We're also agreed that this intermediation, which is the dish of the day here now, means that you need somebody to pool together these projects. Why? Because even large cities don't go to markets directly for smaller projects. Big cities like Mumbai go to local financial institutions for smaller projects. Therefore, pooling, the efficiency of transaction costs means that you need an intermediary.
Well noted, Rajivan. Well noted. Really good points. I'm just going to, on the pooling issue that you've talked about, this intermediary, yes. That's and I really like the way you introduced this about the balance and what you do and do not need municipal finance for. We're going to jump now to Agustin Nkamaloon Fosso, who is the Permanent Secretary of the Network of African Institutions for Local Government Financing, RIAFCO, which is a network of those intermediaries. So really good points, Rajivan. And we go to you, Agustin, and then Jean-Pierre. And again, we'll be brutal in the time management, but I think it's really good now to get this spectrum of intermediaries available. And thank you very much indeed, Rajivan, and deep apologies for having to be a little bit time managerial towards the end.
No, very nice. It was good fun. Cheers.
Thank you. Agustin, are you there?
Ouais, je suis là. Est-ce que vous m'entendez? I will speak in French.
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
It's better for me. Est-ce que vous
No
m'entendez?
problem. Please go ahead.
Vous m'entendez?
Yes. Oui,
Ok, bonjour et merci d'avoir associé le réseau des institutions africaines de financement de collectivités locales à cette grande réunion de très haut niveau. Et ce que j'ai entendu depuis ce matin, c'est très intéressant par rapport aux objectifs que s'est fixé notre réseau, le réseau des institutions de financement de collectivités locales. Les institutions de financement de collectivités locales sont des structures un peu particulières qui sont présentes dans certains pays, particulièrement les pays francophones, et qui sont des intermédiaires entre les États qui les ont créés et les collectivités locales, et dont leur mission principale, c'est donc de transférer les ressources de l'État vers les collectivités locales, premièrement, et deuxièmement, de les accompagner dans l'assistance technique. Donc, ce sont ces deux missions-là qui sont exercées par ces institutions. Elles sont, on va dire, d'expériences diverses. Certaines sont aujourd'hui encore très, très focalisées sur l'aspect transfert de ressources fiscales de l'État vers les collectivités locales. Mais d'autres qui sont relativement avancées sont déjà dans une phase où elles peuvent intervenir dans tout ce que j'ai entendu aujourd'hui, c'est-à-dire aller rechercher des ressources sur les marchés, aller mettre en place des garanties, donc faire vraiment du financement de façon importante. Et donc, il est intéressant d'avoir donc ce type de rencontre parce que l'objectif pour nous, c'est d'amener nos membres, les membres du réseau, vers ce type de diversification. Je remercie l'UNCDF d'ailleurs qui, dès le départ, nous a aidés à aider les collectivités, en fait, ces institutions, en mettant en place des études qui nous ont permis de permettre à ces institutions de diversifier leurs ressources. Cette étude portait sur 4 pays, Madagascar, le Cameroun, le Mali et le Niger. Donc, notre réseau, parce que je n'ai pas beaucoup de temps, hein, donc je suis obligé d'aller très, très vite, compte énormément sur ce type de rencontre parce que l'objectif, c'est à la fin de renforcer vraiment ces institutions et de...
Agustin, we seem to have lost you. And but I appreciate the way you listed the countries where these institutions are in place. And you built very much on what Rajivan mentioned about, their job. So I think it was a nice segue from Rajivan's comments. Also checking in the chat box. It's correct that these are very complex issues, and the conversation there between Paul Smoke and Paulius is really important in the sense that we don't have very much time, although this is a long meeting by Zoom meeting standards. It can't be face-to-face. It would normally be a whole day or even 2 days. We tried to compress it into 3 hours. So I really thank you all for bearing with us. And yes, we're just skating on the surface. Rajivan talked about these subnational institutions. Paul Smoke talked about the environment in which they're in, and the institutional environment. We heard from Riafco, from Agustin Fosso about the countries where they're working and that there's a network of them. And I'm now going to go to Jean-Francois Arbeau, who is the Executive Director of FMDV, Fonds Mondial de Ville, that provides support to these type of institutions and has partnered with us as UNCDF through the Malaga Coalition and outside of it, but more broadly on technical support to institutions like this. So what kind of technical support do they need? Are they able to get it? And maybe a couple of examples, but again, time is running short. So I'm apologizing in advance if I have to cut you off, but over to you, Jean-Francois. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, David, and a pleasure to be there, and hello to everyone here. So I will try to focus really on those subnational development banks that are national public development banks with a focus to finance local governments. And I think it was very interesting to hear from Rajivan, from Salim, and from others that there are different types of financial intermediaries, whether they are local, global, regional, and the focus of FMDB now today will be on these SDBs, subnational development banks. And I think they are very interesting because they play the role of a professional intermediaries, and they play a transformative role in local finance market because they can be policymakers, being those national public entities, being the intermediary between local governments and ministries. They can push for new policies to create the enabling environment for municipal finance. And two, they can be also market makers because they can help local governments to structure investable projects and then to catalyze investment at the global level and to propose those investment portfolios from the local governments to the DFIs. So for these reasons, FMDB has been supporting SDBs in Africa through the RIAFCO since 2014. And since last year, we are partnering with the Finance in Common Summit, which is a coalition of 500 public development banks led by AFD. And we've been structuring the first alliance of SDBs in Latin America. And this year, together with RIAFCO, we are launching the SDB Alliance of Africa. And these SDBs alliance are mobilizing SDBs, but also all the ecosystem of actors partnering with them. So local governments, MDBs, DFIs, UN agencies, because I will finish on that, David, on your recommendation. I think that SDBs, they don't necessarily need to have a particular technical support. We need to break the silos and to be the translator between all the different stakeholders. And SDBs can play this role because local governments and DFIs and investors, they are talking a different language. And these intermediaries can help also to structure the language. And then, of course, we will need to have technical assistance, financial engineering to structure the pipelines. But I think the first step will be to learn to speak the same language and to better understand the criteria and the condition of each side. I will stop there, David, and hopefully we invite everybody to join those alliance that will be launched at the Finance in Common Summit in October in Côte d'Ivoire, and I guess all of you will be warmly welcome to join us. Thanks, David.
Thank you so much indeed, Jean-François, and very good points again.
J'ai eu un souci, je ne sais pas si on m'entend, si vous connectez. J'ai eu un souci Internet là, donc tout à l'heure, donc je n'ai pas pu terminer mon intervention, mais bon, j'avais dit l'essentiel, je pense.
Thank you, Agustin. Fully understood. I'm afraid, given the time constraints, we now have 3 more speakers to bring in the remaining 10 minutes. So, but you made a very powerful intervention, and I think you built on what was said previously by the 2 previous speakers. So I think we have a good picture now of the role of these subnational financial intermediaries, of which RIAFCO is the organizing entity in Africa. So thank you so much, and we will be in touch. And looking forward to having this as a meeting that is in person, where we can really develop it. I think that's where the real 3rd Malaga meeting will be. But thank you for bearing with us in this format. Thank you. So we have 3 more speakers in the remaining 10 minutes or so. And we are going to go very quickly to Mohamed Sefiani, the Mayor of Chefchaouen. And your role, Honorable Mayor, is just in a few minutes. And I know you've been present for most of this discussion. You know, what do you feel as a mayor? Are we starting to offer you what you need? Then we're going to go to Professor Jeannie Birch, who from Pennsylvania University, who actually will give a perspective from her angle about what she's heard so far. And then finally, we'll go to Naveed Hanif, the Assistant Secretary General for Economic Development at the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs. And we're really privileged to have you with us, Naveed. And of course, some of this is going to require changes, even in the legislative environment at the international level. So we may have to start thinking about how we bring that about. So that's a tall order for 10 minutes. So it's going to be literally 2.5 minutes each. So over to you, Mayor, Honorable Mayor Sefiani, the floor is yours for a minute or two. But what do you think from what you've heard so far, wearing your mayor's hat? Over to you.
Thank you very much, David. Merci beaucoup et merci de m'avoir invité à cet important événement. Moi, en tant que maire, et je crois que les maires aussi présents ici sont d'accord avec moi, nous avons bien sûr, nous travaillons sur une planification, nous avons un engagement politique, nous écoutons les citoyens et nous faisons l'approche participative, mais nous avons besoin d'implémenter les programmes et les projets. Et implémenter, ça veut dire finance. Donc, tout ce qui a été dit aujourd'hui, tout ce que se fait par l'ensemble des institutions telles que UNCDF, FNDV, toute la coalition, est très, très important. Et là, je prends l'exemple de ma ville, Chefchaouen, en tant que maire de Chefchaouen, une ville bleue du Maroc. Là, c'est un beau projet qui est en train de se mettre en place. Un projet qui fait partie de notre plan d'action climat, qui est le renouvellement du réseau, de l'ensemble du réseau de l'éclairage public de la ville. On passe bien sûr d'un éclairage traditionnel, consommateur d'énergie, consommateur d'argent, parce que les factures sont lourdes, à bien sûr à un éclairage qui est smart, qui ne consomme pas de l'énergie, donc friendly, qui est ami du climat et aussi ami du budget municipal. Et là, c'est une expérience pilote que nous sommes en train de monter. C'est avec UCLG, FMDV et UNCDF. Maintenant, nous avons UNCDF, il a accepté, donc il nous accompagne en tant que partenaire avec les autres partenaires. Et là, nous passons à une phase finale de réaliser ce beau projet, notre rêve d'avoir un éclairage public LED et smart et à travers un financement intelligent lui aussi et un financement qui ne nécessite pas une garantie du gouvernement national. Et c'est ça l'innovation. Donc voilà, en 2018, je voulais partager cette idée. Et s'il y a un message à mettre en place, ça veut dire il faut qu'on transforme, nous les maires, les idées en projets. Et les projets, avec l'appui des institutions, des partenaires, on les transforme avec un projet qui pourront être présentés aux institutions financières. Et après, bien sûr, passer à la recherche de financement. Et là, nous sommes dans un projet pilote. Et je remercie encore une fois nos partenaires.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And I think you mentioned a really good point about the smart lighting. You make a saving there, and with the saving, you can repay the financing. And that's the package that's being worked on. And so this is the kind of thinking that we're trying to highlight in this whole meeting, how to start to do this at scale. So we're all pioneers, really. And maybe in 10, 20 years' time, people will look back and say, this is where the answers started for the sustainable future that we are all living in. Hopefully our children and grandchildren will be able to say that. So with that, I'm going to go to Jeannie Birch, Professor Jeannie Birch. Again, in a few minutes, from your perspective in academia, having studied this whole thing for many, many years, are you starting to see an ecosystem coming together that looks a little bit different? Or should we all remain pessimistic and nothing will ever change? Over to you, Professor Birch.
Thank you, David, and thank you for this wonderful meeting. I have 3 or 4 points I'd like to make. First of all, I think this meeting itself has reinforced the 5-part reform platform that you proposed in the beginning. Every single element has come to be discussed and turns out to be extremely important for creating and strengthening the ecosystem that we do have. We certainly have an ecosystem, but it needs that strengthening. Secondly, there have been incredible resources that have been exposed here today. Everything from the data resources that we have, for example, the OECD Observatory, to the knowledge that Meridian brings to us in terms of understanding how to put together a package, to the intermediary information that we receive, the necessity of pooling and scaling up the projects. I think all of this is created within this environment today, a series of connections from which we can build on this 5-part reform process. And you've really shown us the possibilities for innovation, institutional innovation, and innovation in the tools that we will employ. The third point I wanted to make is that we really understand the importance of identifying the national enabling environment as we try to integrate these 5-part reforms into the work that we're doing. Certainly there are standard elements that we need to understand with regard to financing, but there are also extremely unique elements that have to do with how national governments interact with local governments. And I think we've had a sufficient or a good deal of evidence, particularly in Paul Smoke's discussion and other discussions from the mayors and local officials relative to what they're struggling with. So that the context is really important. So we have to separate the standard elements that we can affect and then deal with the context as we have to, as we try to pool and scale up. And my fourth point and last point is this is a really urgent matter. We are, of course, experiencing the problems from rebuilding after COVID. We're experiencing lack of peace in the world. We're experiencing inflation and of course, the global issues of revolving around development, poverty, environment, global change, et cetera, need to be addressed by the kinds of reforms that you're talking about. So I can't wait till you take this to the next level. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Professor Birch, the great comments. And indeed, it does have to go to the next level. And I like the way that you have picked out the interconnectivity and highlighted that, yes, the ecosystem exists. It just needs to be strengthened. It's kind of there under the radar a little bit. It needs to become what we tried to say in the publication, that the linkage was there at the beginning. Maybe we'll send it again in a moment. It needs to be seen that local government finance is development finance. And that's where these pieces need to come higher up the radar. Higher up the, well, perhaps that's the wrong analogy, but higher up the agenda. So colleagues, we've almost come to the end, and the Assistant Secretary General for Economic Development at the United Nations is trying to log on. There are some internet connectivity issues, but we're extremely grateful to have the Assistant Secretary General making this effort. So we'll just pause for a moment or two, and when he does log on, this will be the possibility to start to take you to the next level, as you referred to, Eugenie, because we've started to work with his office about how you then put this on the broader agenda of institutional reform, regulatory reform, etc., at the international level. And that will be required for some of these instruments to really take off. So I'm just looking at Nan and Amadou. Do we have any success yet with regard to registering the Assistant Secretary General?
While we're waiting, we should thank you, David, for your wonderful moderation of this meeting.
Well, thank you, and apologies to people that if I may have had to cut them off, but I really appreciate that very much indeed, Eugenie. Amadou, any news?
Maybe we can speak with the, we're working on it. Maybe you can speak with the person from Niger. And we're working on it. We're working on it. I'm online with Daniel right now.
You know, I think what we will do, given that we're coming to the very end of the meeting in terms of the sequence of speakers, I think what we'll do is just start to flesh out the next steps. So, you know, we've heard a lot. There are three. Could you mute yourself, please, Amadou? There are three elements to taking this forwards. One, of course, is to continue to talk about it. There is the high-level political forum. There is the UCLG Congress in Korea. There is the UN General Assembly. There is the World Urban Forum. And so this 5-point agenda will be publicized around all of these events. And then there'll be an in-person meeting of the Malaga Coalition, we hope at some point in 2023. So that will continue. The second will be to not only continue to talk about it, but continue to do it. So all of the speakers and all of the participants to continue to make investments through the International Municipal Investment Fund, launch domestic bonds on local currency markets, build institutions like RIAFCO and their member institutions, follow the line of thinking that Rajivan pointed forward about the way a mayor should think in terms of organizing their finances, deploy guarantees from the European Union and others, make these direct lending to cities, build local and other forms of climate adaptation finance into intergovernmental fiscal transfer systems, strengthen own source revenue mobilization, as we've heard. So to continue to do it, and that will require practice on the ground. And the third and final will be to change the regulatory environment so that it can happen more. And this, I think, will require reforms at COP to make the local climate adaptive living facility an unmarket approach so that local governments can have a direct access to climate finance for adaptation. It may need some reforms in countries to build domestic capital markets for local government finance. It may need some reforms across regions, the East Africa region, the UMOA area in West Africa, the ASEAN region, the South Asia, Latin America, to enable these institutions like the African Territorial Agency to operate between different territories. And so to enable some of these vehicles to be able to invest across territories, maybe reforms even at the way that the IMF looks at sovereign liabilities, which is a critical area that needs to be addressed. Very difficult to do, but it needs to be looked at. So there will need to be some of those reforms as well. So we need to continue to talk about it. We need to continue to do it, but we also need to continue to work on some of these reforms to the regulatory environment. So I think given the time, given the fact
he's here.
Oh, wonderful. Naveed, Your Excellency, thank you so much for making it, and really apologies for the delay in getting you connected. So we've just spent 3 hours talking about the global financial ecosystem that works for cities and local governments, talking about the need to talk about it, to do it through various 4 instruments, and then to also address the regulatory and normative environment through institutions like your own at the UN to start the debate on the regulatory environment at the global level for local infrastructure finance. We've highlighted how the book that you've kindly written the forward for and the previous publications on local infrastructure finance and local government finance talk about this agenda. And we look forward to working with you, Assistant Secretary General, on building this global coalition and the financial ecosystem that works for cities and local governments. So we're giving you the floor to close the meeting and any considerations you may have. I understand you haven't been listening to the whole 3 hours, but we're delighted that you were able to make it at the closing. Over to you, Naveed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David, for the opportunity to join you. And I'm sorry I did not listen in for the last 3 hours, but I'm very confident that you had very productive and meaningful discussion, and the conclusions will help countries to really advance the whole exercise that you and I have taken together. Let me now share some ideas with you. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this important discussion in preparation of the 3rd Malaga conference. Putting together the pieces of a financial ecosystem that works for local governments is a critical part of the United Nations financing for sustainable development agenda. It is both deeply urgent and challenging during these times of crises and uncertainty. Indeed, the COVID-19 pandemic, rising inflationary pressures, the impacts of climate change and conflict threaten development gains at the national and local levels. As a close partner of UNCDF and a member of the Malaga Coalition, The Financing for Sustainable Development Office will continue to support local governments to finance through three key channels. Let me briefly capture those for you. Support the international community in ensuring that effective local government finance remains a global development imperative. This year's Financing for Development Forum presented concrete recommendations and galvanized global support for financing the 2030 agenda at both local and national levels. It also reaffirmed the commitment in the Addis Agenda and the Sendai framework to strengthen the capacity of national and local actors to manage and finance a disaster risk reduction. The next Development Cooperation Forum, which will be held in New York in March, will further support the localization of the SDGs. And UNDASA's most recent DCF survey to be launched in 2022 HLPF Forum, which is next month, reveals that more must and can be done to engage local governments in development policy and practice. Through the next DCF, we can ensure the local dimension is better reflected in a new generation of more inclusive, resilient, and risk-informed development cooperation. Second channel is to promote access to sustainable long-term finance at the local level through practical policy advice that is based on the latest UN system-wide research and analyses that David just mentioned. Across the globe, local governments face large mandates with very limited authority and capacity to raise their own revenues. As a result, they rely on often insufficient financial support from national counterparts. At the same time, borrowing remains challenging for most local governments in developing countries. Capital markets are underdeveloped, and most local governments are not deemed creditworthy by private investors. Consequently, interest rates are often unaffordable. Yet, in many cases, these challenges can be gradually overcome. Allow me to mention 4 key policy interventions that support local government access to long-term finance. First and foremost, local government finance must not exist in a vacuum. It must be rooted in a sound institutional setting with a clear assignment of functions and revenue generation responsibilities. It must be supported by predictable and transparent intergovernmental transfers. These arrangements allow local authorities to plan and use their limited financial resources with reasonable flexibility. Second, national governments can provide technical support and guidance for local government finance. Many countries have established or are establishing borrowing and fiscal responsibility frameworks. Such frameworks can provide a crucial foundation for credible borrowing. They guide local governments on the most appropriate financing mechanisms, ranging from public to private, to attract investors for local investments. Third, multilateral, national, and municipal development banks can support local governments by lending more widely and applying innovative credit enhancements that lower the cost of financing both public and private. Fourthly, there's a need to enhance local capacity for project development. Investment opportunities remain unrealized when they are unknown to potential investors. Matching the right project with the right type or mix of investors only works where investor relevant project information is readily available. And I can share with you that we are dealing with this challenge hands-on through the SDG Investment Fair. There's vast experience in project planning, design, and management in the development cooperation community that can and must be shared more effectively. Third, and the last channel is strengthen capacity development in support of local development finance. Development partners must work towards more long-term and programmatic approaches to engage local governments and stakeholders on development finance. South-South cooperation is crucial in this respect, promoting city to city and local to local, sharing of knowledge and expertise for capacity development. Other initiatives are also desirable, such as means to improve the access of local governments to climate change financing mechanisms, to facilitate investments in resilient and sustainable infrastructure. The Global UN Capacity Development Initiative on Infrastructure Asset Management, which we called IAM, led by UNDESA and UNCDF, is a good example of impactful development cooperation at the local level. The initiative has provided support to over 2,500 local officials across the globe to enhance the accessibility, resilience, and sustainability of local infrastructure investment. IAM is also a powerful way to strengthen local development finance, both on the revenue and expenditures side. Distinguished participants, the COVID-19 pandemic has underscored once again how local governments serve on the front lines of sustainable development. We must offer better support to local governments, ensuring adequate resourcing and capacity. We at the FSDO remain committed to strengthen our long-standing partnership with you in every aspect of our work, from norm setting and policy analysis to capacity development. We look forward to engaging with your valuable work at the local level and to more occasions for collaboration. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join you, and I hope we can strengthen our collaboration with you. David, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Naveed. Really appreciate those closing comments and looking forward to strengthening this collaboration as you've defined around the agenda that we've discussed. We'll be sending out a summary of the discussion together with the recording. I think the high-level political forum will be one of the earliest opportunities to bring it forwards, particularly in the local government days, and we talked about that earlier. So colleagues, thank you all very much. Thank you for those that have stayed on the full 3 hours. There are 74 participants that made it all the way through. So thank you very, very much. And have a great rest of the day, morning or evening. All the best to you and God bless. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye.